City Council Committee on Jobs, Wages, and Workforce Development. Tonight I'm joined, first of all, thank you everybody for coming out. Tonight I'm joined by my colleagues, the lead sponsor, Councilor Lydia Edwards, Councilor... No, I know, I hear. We all love Lydia, but we're going to try and keep our expressions to ourselves. I hate doing that, but I have to do it, otherwise we'll be here all night. We all love it. We can do it one more time. Lydia Edwards, all right. Okay, guys. Thank you. I'm also joined by City Councilor at Large, Althea Garrison, and my good friend from South Boston, City Councilor Eddie Flynn. I want to remind you that this public hearing is being recorded and broadcast live on Comcast Channel 8 and RCN 82, Verizon 1964, and streamed on boston.gov/City Council TV. Please silence your cell phones and other devices. We will also take testimony and would appreciate that if you would sign in and check off the box if you wish to testify over there. Please state your name, affiliation, residence, and limit your comments to a few minutes to ensure that all comments and concerns can be heard. Today's hearing is on docket number 0734. In order for a hearing regarding student, workers, and labor practices in Boston's institutions of higher learning. So the way we're going to start this off, the first thing that I have to say is none of the colleges showed up. We have letters from Harvard, Paul Curran, who's the Director of Labor and Employee Relations, a letter from Boston College, David Quigley, a letter from Boston University, Gene Morrison, University Provost and Chief Academic Officer, and we have a letter from Northeastern University, John Tobin. With that being said, I'd like to call my first panel, which is Sam Levinson, Justin Bloch, if I said that right, Zack C, Alex Achmed, and Carly Barry, yeah. Is that you? Come on up. Oh, yeah, and we'll start with opening statements, and then you guys can get into your testimony. I'm going to start with the lead sponsor.
So thank you so much for coming here tonight. I really appreciate all of you showing up in solidarity to have what I think is a very robust, important conversation. It's part of the mission of the Boston City Council to stand with workers. We've done this several times throughout the year. We stood with the National Grid workers. We stood with FSS and with 32BJ workers. So we're standing with another set of workers. And I think it's very important that we as the Boston City Council make very clear that we see graduate students as workers and value your work, value your rights, and value your voice. It's unfortunate that the universities chose not to come and instead sent letters. And as this conversation continues, we may consider at some point some form of subpoena power to make sure that they come and explain what's going on and why they aren't supporting you. That being said,
can we please hold our expressions? Thank you.
That being said, today is about that story and highlighting it. If they choose not to counter it, then that's their choice that they're making. I'm so proud of the students who are organizing. I'm proud of labor who's here also to organize in solidarity. This is going to be a robust conversation. And to those who ask why the City Council would do such a thing, this is a private conversation. This has everything to do with just between two parties, and we should mind our own business. Wherever social justice or injustice is happening, that is our business. That is our job as the City Council to stand up and to highlight and to absolutely provide a megaphone to whoever is organizing. So thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards. Councilor Garrison.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Althea Garrison, Councilor at Large. I would like to thank everyone for coming out for this hearing. We are here to take testimony on labor practices in Boston Institution of Higher Education. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the lead sponsor, Councilor Edwards, for your work on this issue and your work on so many labor issues, not just on the Boston City Council, but throughout your entire professional career. I'm proud to be here. I think of this issue in this hearing just as it is any other labor issue, an organizing issue. The City Council stood with the locked out United Steelworkers during the National Grid lockout. We were there with the SEIU 32BJ, The city council is still with our nurses, the Mass Nurses Association, and most recently, United 26, which is the hotel and restaurant workers during their strike. And that was made up of a lot of immigrants and women, hardworking working men and women that were fighting for a decent wage. I'm also proud to be here with so many different organized labor unions that are here. And as my friend from the Greater Boston Labor Council, Darlene, has said, and I just want to quote one line from her testimony, which I believe 100%, student workers are just like any worker, and they deserve the same rights and respect as everyone. They deserve a living wage, good health care, protection from harassment and discrimination, just like everyone else. And I think that's where I stand as a member of the Boston City Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. We've also been joined by Councilor Nisa Savi-George. Councilor?
I don't have an opening statement as I just walked in the door. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So what I'd like to do is go from left to right in 5 to 7 minutes if possible for people. I mean, I won't cut people off, but I'm going to time you around 5 to 7 minutes. Okay?
Okay, thank you. So hello, my name is Alex Achmed. I'm a graduate worker and a PhD student in computer science at Northeastern University, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you about my university's disrespectful and harmful behavior both towards its workers and the city of Boston. As graduate student employees, we teach classes and discussion sections, grade assignments, papers and projects, and conduct research and scholarship. Although it is well known that graduate students assist in teaching, fewer people know that we also act as the instructors of record, taking full responsibility for teaching entire courses ourselves. We are responsible for a significant portion of the educational portion of the university, while also performing the cutting-edge research that brings in millions of dollars in research grants every year. However, Northeastern, along with many other American universities, continue to deny that our work is work. This is far from an isolated issue. Northeastern hired an expensive anti-union law firm to build a strategy to not only dissuade workers from forming a union, but also running a legal strategy that endangers the legal right to organize for tens of thousands of student workers across the country. They're paying huge sums of money to try and bust the adjunct faculties union, the full-time non-tenure track faculties union, and ours. They refuse to acknowledge the very real issues we experience on a daily basis that lead us to organize to demand dignity on the job. We are dedicated workers battling to win recognition of our contribution to the success of the university. Many of us come from working class backgrounds who struggle to make ends meet while working and earning our degrees, often living paycheck to paycheck. Many of us face discrimination, harassment, and abuse at work on the basis of our identities as LGBTQ people and as people of color. We experience mental health issues such as depression and anxiety at a rate far above the general population. At Northeastern, graduate students have attempted to organize support groups for each other to make up for the fact that we only have 15 mental health counselors for a total of over 25,000 graduate and undergraduate students. In one department, grad students organized themselves when it was suddenly announced that their pay would be cut by a third with the same work expected of them. At a recent meeting our union organized, graduate students shed tears over their working conditions and dealing with verbal and physical violence on the job. After going through all available channels for recourse, we find that there is no accountability or due process. We need a union to guarantee real recourse through which our grievances can be addressed. We are organizing because we demand dignity and fairness at work. We know that these issues are not exclusive to Northeastern. Student workers across the nation are building unions to combat against the abusive nature of academia that has persisted for a long time. That is why you now see so many grad students engaging in labor activism all across the country, in this city, and here in this room today. We do our work for the same reason that we organize, because we care deeply about teaching and scholarship, and we recognize the importance of higher education. Ultimately, we believe that we must work to make academia more sustainable for the benefit of our own institutions and the cities that we live in. In Boston, Northeastern has aided in the dwindling of affordable housing as they continue to expand tax-free into Roxbury. Our union has joined in coalition with other unions at Northeastern and with community organizations such as Reclaim Roxbury and the Poor People's Campaign. As a group, we demand that Northeastern should pay its fair share of payments in lieu of taxes to the city of Boston. We are asking for the chance to vote for our union and guarantee that when we win, Northeastern will recognize our union and bargain with us. Student workers all over Massachusetts have been bargaining for contracts for decades in the public sector, including at UMass Boston. In 2016, we won the right to do the same, and it is disgraceful that our university will not recognize our right and agree to bargain, but is instead choosing to threaten our ability to organize through intimidation and legal maneuvering. Gaining formal union recognition will allow us to commit more resources to making Northeastern more sustainable, both internally and externally in its relationship to the city. It is in the benefit of the city of Boston for these institutions of higher learning to bargain in good faith with their workers. And so I ask City Council to please do everything in your power to rein in these institutions of higher education. Don't let their nonprofit status fool you. These are multi-billion-dollar corporations that seek to grow and expand themselves at the expense of workers, Boston residents, and the city itself. I appreciate this opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Name and affiliation? That was good, 4 minutes, just over 4 minutes.
Hello, my name is Zack C. I'm currently a fourth-year PhD candidate in the biology department.
Excuse me, Zack C, like, is there a reason why it?
I don't want to give my full name.
Okay, fair enough.
I'm currently a fourth-year PhD candidate in the biology department at Boston University. I'm here with my fellow workers to remind you all about the hard work we do in our doctoral programs, the toll that work takes on us, and why we're using our rights to organize, to unionize, to improve our working conditions. Specifically, I want to focus on the mental health crisis that graduate workers face that Alex alluded to a bit ago. According to a 2018 study on graduate workers at Harvard in response to a graduate worker's suicide there, 18% of that study population suffered from depression and anxiety, 3 times the national average. And 11% reported suicidal ideation during the study. This crisis is, of course, compounded for graduate workers in marginalized communities. For instance, in a survey of grad workers from over 200 universities, 35% of cis men reported depression, 43% of women reported depression, and 57% of transgender or gender nonconforming people reported depression. And I have those studies available if anybody wants them. Why does this crisis persist? When I talk to my colleagues, it's the norm for us to discuss our struggles with poor mental health due to our stressful work lives. We tell each other about discrimination and harassment from our supervisors, inadequate health care, the inability to pay our rent, long hours of work, and how these cause anxiety and depression. For me, overwork takes a serious toll. As a laboratory research assistant, I spend many hours per day dissecting insects by microscope, cleaning our lab, driving between labs and field sites, and that leaves me little time to eat, sleep, or do anything else. To get everything done, I regularly work from morning to night, often past midnight, including during holidays and academic breaks, which just become more work time for me. And if I were to reduce my work time, I would risk being discharged from my program. With my days dominated by my work and without the time to attend to my needs, I've been left as a worker with never-ending anxiety and suicidal depression, without relief. For those of us with permanent damage to our mental health, it is clear that this is not a temporary problem that will be worth it in the end. I personally know that my emotional scars of my deteriorating mental health will never really go away. And considering that it is so normal for graduate students across the university to talk about our mental health, to joke about how our anxiety and how we really could just end it all, it is also clear to us that this is a university-wide problem that requires a university-wide solution. Right now, our universities give us strategies and services to cope with our mental health, but access to therapists and anti-anxiety medications do not hold these universities accountable for addressing the working conditions that cause these mental health issues to begin with. Unfortunately, our mental health crisis has been the means through which our university's work gets done. We work as our mental health deteriorates, the universities continue to profit, those who haven't committed suicide leave, were replaced by new workers, and the cycle of mental health deterioration inevitably continues and repeats. However, we graduate workers don't accept this situation. We're unionizing in part so that we can change the working conditions that contribute to our mental health deterioration. Through collective bargaining, we can establish reasonable workload protections and guaranteed time off, as well as protection from harassment and discrimination in our workplaces, enforceable through a fair grievance process. We will continue to fight despite opposition from university administrations. Boston University, Boston College, Harvard, and Northeastern have all explicitly opposed us unionizing. But they should remember that when the universities resist our union's demands for a fair contract and try to prevent us from organizing, they do so not just at the expense of our economic well-being, but also at the expense of our mental health. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zach.
Hi, I'm Justin Blush at Harvard. I'm a third-year PhD student in the economics department and a teaching fellow as well, and also a member of the bargaining committee for the Harvard Graduate Student Union, HGSU. Today I want to share some of the challenges that student workers face with our health coverage, over which the Harvard administration has refused to bargain so far. One of the most important parts of any contract negotiations is healthcare. The ability of student workers to receive healthcare they need is a crucial part of our ability to perform our teaching and research and to best contribute to our academic community. Not every student at Harvard is guaranteed health insurance coverage. Many hourly workers in professional schools go without health insurance or pay full price for access to the student plan. For PhD students, whose typical time to degree is 6 years, many face a gap in their 5th year. When we teach in our 3rd and 4th years, we have health insurance. But if we teach in our 5th year, many students have to go without it, either pay full price or purchase it elsewhere. Some students take out loans to cover this 5th year gap in health coverage, and other members have gone onto Mass Health Connector to find adequate coverage. In addition to who is not covered, there are serious issues with the content of the plan. Namely, our members face issues with the limit on the number of specialist visits and the mental health copays for mental health care. As my colleagues have noted, that mental health concerns are a really big issue among the graduate student population. And for students who use the maximum 40 visits per year, which is less than a week, and many people often need at least weekly visits, it adds up to over $1,000 of annual copays, which is a substantial burden on the tight graduate student budget. This plus the specialist limit are what makes Harvard's refusal to bargain over the health insurance particularly egregious. I'll just share 2 brief stories of student workers who have had serious health conditions and cannot access the specialists they need because Harvard Healthcare, the health insurance we plan has a limit of 6 visits to specialists. So the first example is a student in the 3rd year of their PhD program in the Longwood campus, working as a research assistant. She suffers from a connective tissue disorder, a systemic genetic illness that requires substantial care. Her rare disease begets, in her words, comorbidities, which necessitates seeing specialists such as a gynecologist, a geneticist, a urologist, a neurologist, an endocrinologist, a physiatrist, and rheumatologist as well. As you can imagine, the university on-campus services are not typically designed to provide such specialized care, and so she has to go to outside providers. This is where the 6-visit specialist limit really becomes painfully evident. When a specialist orders testing and a follow-up visit is needed to see the results of the test, both visits count against those 6. This has led this student work to avoid seeing the doctors that she needs during flare-ups or onset of new symptoms. Living with a condition that causes chronic pain is hard enough, but she should not have to bear the added burden of having to ration her care. The second example is a student worker in a doctoral program in the public health school who also suffers from a connective tissue disorder. She worked for every semester for the past 4 years of her program, and despite continually working, she was not offered health insurance as a part of her job and had to pay for insurance out of pocket. Her disorder impacts almost every organ in serious ways. She's had 5 major surgeries while at Harvard. She sees 9 highly specialized doctors, sometimes 3 or 4 times a year, which would definitely exceed this 6-visit limit. With a specialist limit in place and campus health services not being able to provide those specialized needs, she's instead opted to pay $765 a month in insurance through a plan and through the Mass Health Connector because it actually covers the care that she needs. In December 2018, the student worker suffered a heart attack and in 2019 had to get heart surgery to replace a calcified mitral valve. She had lined up a teaching position for the spring but could not teach, and with no teaching stipend or graduate stipend, could not pay for health insurance and decided to complete her degree early. She finished her dissertation 3 weeks out of surgery and defended her dissertation with a partially collapsed lung, so she could finish her degree. We share these stories to demonstrate that the ability of student workers to get quality health insurance greatly impacts our abilities to perform our work and to further the academic mission of our institutions. We formed a union to have a greater say over our working conditions and benefits, and it's painfully clear that there are gaps in our health coverage that need to be addressed. Harvard administration's refusal to bargain over health insurance plans shows they have not yet taken the needs of student workers seriously, while preserving the conditions that force student workers with the greatest health needs to go on the outside market to find other health insurance options. We ask for your support in encouraging Harvard administration to do the right thing and to negotiate on issues including adequate health care that are crucial to the lives of student workers. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Sam Levinson. I'm a PhD candidate at the end of my 3rd year in the chemistry department at Boston College. I'm also an active member of the Boston College Graduate Employees Union and have been since my first semester at BC. Thank you for convening this hearing and giving us the opportunity to speak today. I have had an allergy to beta-lactam drugs such as penicillin and ampicillin since I was an infant. The reaction I have to these compounds is a systemic allergic response. To this date, this reaction has taken the form of hives. A skin reaction may progress to the more commonly recognized symptoms of anaphylaxis, swelling of the blood vessels in the airway that prevents the patient from breathing. There is no way to predict if or when the symptoms of a systemic allergic response will progress to that level. I work in a chemical biology lab where we work with bacteria and human cancer cells. We have a variety of antibiotics in our lab, including penicillin, ampicillin, and carbenicillin. I cannot make stocks of these compounds myself, as being in the same room as the free-floating chemical is too dangerous, so I rely on others to make them for me. My primary care physician prescribed an epinephrine auto-injector, EpiPen, to me when I told her about being exposed to beta-lactam drugs at work. My exposure to these compounds is entirely a work-related risk, and therefore Boston College should accommodate this medical necessity and pay to fill the prescription. I brought the prescription to the operations manager and safety officer for the BC Chemistry Department in July of 2016, with a request that in addition to the EpiPen, the department also stocked the first aid kit with diphenhydramine, commonly sold under the brand name Benadryl. The operations manager brought the prescription to the director of BC Environmental Health and Safety. She refused to fill the prescription or to provide Benadryl in the first aid kits, and provided a number of spurious excuses for doing so. To date, I have had regular arguments with the operations manager regarding EHS's failure to provide this safety equipment in a dangerous lab setting. At my last yearly physical, my primary care physician had to renew my prescription for an EpiPen because it had expired. I scanned the prescription and emailed it to the operations manager. I explained in this email that if BC once again refused to pay for the prescription, and if I experienced any injury as a result of exposure to beta-lactam drugs, I would sue both Boston College and the director of BC Environmental Health and Safety personally. I also explained that I have left instructions to my family to do the same should I die from anaphylactic shock. Within days, a representative from BC's Office of Institutional Diversity contacted me regarding my reasonable accommodation request. They approved my request after asking for additional paperwork from both myself and my physician, and I finally have my EpiPen. Hopefully, Boston College won't take 3 years to reimburse me, but without a union contract dictating the timeline of graduate employee reimbursements, I have no guarantee. Because Boston College refuses to bargain with our democratically elected union, I have no legal protections from my dangerously negligent employer. I assume a deadly risk every day that I come to work under the duress of not being able to progress in my profession. If Boston College would just come to the table, I would be in a position to bargain for safer working conditions. If graduate workers at BC had a union contract, I would have access to legal recourse to force my employer to help me manage the risks I face in my job, because it's clear they're not going to follow the law of their own accord. This issue is not trivial. It is one of life and death. I must ask, why does the administration at Boston College not bargain with our union? Why do they care more about lawsuits than about whether I live or die? Why did it take the threat of a lawsuit for BC to do the right thing? Unfortunately, the callousness and lack of respect I have experienced is common behavior from the BC administration towards BC graduate workers. The administration at Boston College has repeatedly tried to silence our voices as we demand that they finally bargain with our union. They are so afraid of not having absolute power over their employees that they went so far as to academically sanction many of us when we protested their refusal to bargain, using our rights as workers. This retaliation came in the form of inappropriate academic punishments for 18 graduate employees, of which I was one. We were punished for passing out flyers at a campus event, a workplace action that we have the right to do as workers. The dean's office also put 3 of my colleagues on academic probation for speaking out at a speech by University President Father Leahy and leading a walkout of that event. One of these 3 was punished despite not having even taken the action, as affirmed by statements from more than 15 people who attended the speech. This graduate employee received a high level of discipline, and if he had participated again in protected concerted activity in support of himself and fellow workers at BC, he might have been expelled. As an international student worker, expulsion from BC would have jeopardized his visa and his ability to remain in the US. The Boston College administration is using academic discipline to discourage union activism, and the decision to punish union supporters independent of their actual actions is antithetical to the evidence-based process of academic research and to the mission of justice that the university claims to support. BC administrators know that labor law protects concerted activity, but is also well aware that because the anti-worker Trump Labor Board, bringing a complaint to the board would jeopardize our status as workers and that of all student workers at private universities. These intimidation tactics will not work, though, because we as workers refuse to hold our silence in the face of injustice. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. We'll let them have that one. Yeah. It'll come on.
Right
There
on.
you go.
Good evening. My name is Carly Brandt, and I am currently a doctoral student in religion at Harvard University. I study American nuclear testing in the Marshall Islands, and I just finished my 6th year at Harvard. I was there for 2 years, finishing a master's degree in religion, ethics, and politics before I began my PhD in 2015. As part of my PhD, I work as a teaching fellow, which means that I help teach classes to undergraduates and graduate students. I grade coursework, I meet with students during office hours, I lecture, and I lead review and discussion sections. Thank you for holding this hearing. I'm here tonight to speak with you about my experiences as a graduate student and a new mother, and to urge you to take action to support graduate student worker parents, which I believe is in the best interests of these universities and our communities. This moment provides us with an opportunity to come together to collaborate to create better and more equitable institutions. This past year has been an exciting and challenging one for me. In addition to turning 30, I presented papers on my dissertation research at different national conferences, visited the National Archives to conduct research for my dissertation until the government shutdown prevented me from concluding that research, completed a chapter of my dissertation, presented at a colloquium, taught a class, and had a baby, Cyrilina, who turned 1 2 weeks ago. By far, the biggest challenge that I have faced this year has been childcare. Finding a place to leave my daughter while I work has been incredibly costly and time-consuming. Even though I put Cyrilina on the wait list at 3 different daycare centers a week after she was born, it was not until 6 months later in January that she finally received a spot at a daycare 9 miles away from where I live. I have spent the past 12 months racked with anxiety about how much more work I could have completed if I had had access to affordable, high-quality childcare. Anxiety knowing that I've probably added an entire year onto time of my degree, because as I quickly learned, it's impossible to write a dissertation, to teach and parent all at the same time without any help from my institution. And most significantly and lamentably, anxiety about the fact that I am not alone in this struggle. The lack of institutional support for student worker parents has a disproportionate impact on women and student workers without access to outside wealth. Currently, Cyrilina attends daycare all day, 3 days a week. It costs $320 for those 3 days, which adds up to $1,280 a month. Since I cannot afford to enroll her full-time, I also have a babysitter come on Mondays and Fridays for 4 to 5 hours. This costs an additional $112 to $130 a week. Between January 1st of this year and June 30th, I will have paid a total of $10,560 on childcare. This doesn't include the times that I've had to get a babysitter during the evening to attend a colloquium or event on campus, nor does it include the cost of bringing my daughter to academic conferences where I've presented my work. I know that Harvard faculty are eligible for dependent care fund grants, which help with caregiving costs during short-term professional travel, and I believe that this is something that should also be made available to graduate worker parents. Harvard faculty are also eligible for the Access Program, which is an initiative that enables faculty to meet their caregiving needs while succeeding in their academic careers. They receive priority enrollment at Harvard Child Care Centers, and faculty making less than $200,000 a year are eligible for subsidies to help cover the cost of child care. I made $34,000 this past year, and I received 0 subsidies. In addition, I paid $1,901 each semester and $400 last June for my daughter to be covered under Harvard health insurance. Her health insurance bills, not including copays and other costs that have resulted from her healthcare needs, have totaled an additional $4,200 in the 12 months since she was born. When Cyrilina was born, I received a one-time payment of $6,500 from Harvard University. I was also told that I was eligible for 12 weeks of leave, unpaid, and I didn't take this because, like almost every other woman and parent I know who is a student worker, I could not afford to forego a paycheck for 12 weeks. I know student worker parents who have found it necessary to get another job on top of the work they already do as graduate students, teaching, researching, and writing, and the work they already do as parents in order to make ends meet. Next year, I will be teaching full-time and anticipate spending in excess of $21,600 on childcare. I also anticipate spending around $4,000 to ensure that she has health insurance, not including the cost of diapers, wipes, food, clothing, or housing. That's a total of over $25,000. Next year, I anticipate making around $33,000. As you can see, the situation is untenable.
For full-time?
Full-time.
Okay.
As you can see, the situation is untenable. At Yale, for example, I know graduate students receive an annual stipend of $4,600 from the university, and their children receive health insurance at no additional cost to the students. They created these policies to demonstrate their commitment to helping all graduate students succeed during their time at school. Harvard does provide a subsidized membership to Care.com, which I use to find our babysitter, but the 10 days of emergency care that the university helps cover can't be used to pay her. It can only be used to partially subsidize the cost of daycare or babysitter chosen by Care.com in an emergency. As a result, I have found this benefit incredibly difficult to utilize, as have the other parents I've spoken with. In an emergency situation, the last thing you want to do is leave your child with a complete stranger. I don't want to have to choose between being a scholar and a mother. From where I am sitting, it seems as though Harvard has an opportunity to take action and lead on issues related to working families. Ensuring that student workers who are new parents, and particularly new mothers and low-income student workers, are able to finish their degrees and graduate will benefit our students, our universities, our children, and our communities. Thank you.
Thank you. At this point, we'll go into some questioning first. Alex.
Yes.
So what does your package look like from Northeastern? You work for them as a student. What do you get paid? Are there any other benefits? I get a sense of why you're working there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So my annual salary is $35,000.
Yeah.
We get Blue Cross Blue Shield health insurance.
Full coverage?
Huh?
Full coverage or partial coverage?
It is full. We have a $25 copay for medical and mental health.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Childcare, I don't need it, but you have also a subscription to Care.com, and you can also get 12 weeks unpaid leave.
Unpaid leave?
Unpaid, yeah.
So how many hours a week do you do? Full-time, 40 hours?
Yeah, yeah.
And then on top of your schoolwork and whatever else is going on?
Yeah, so I'm in a late stage of my PhD, so I'm starting my 6th year, so I'm full-time doing research. Yeah.
Oh, okay. And Zach, can you explain give me a little sense of what your schedule is, time work, time at school, and so what's your time management like?
So, like Alex, I'm also full-time research. I don't take classes anymore.
Okay.
I go, depending on my funding situation, I either am teaching. At Boston University, we are either funded to do research, or if we don't have grants, we're funded to teach. So in my situation, I'm funded to do research during the summer, and then I'll be teaching in the fall. So right now, normally it's from, as I said, morning until night working usually, at least like 10 hours, maybe 12 hours a day. That's normally during the weekday. And then I also work during weekends as well.
Do you have health insurance?
Yes.
You do. And what is your health insurance package like?
I don't use so certain things don't apply to me. I do have co-pays for different things. For instance, mental health, I do have co-pays for medication, so things that would cost like $100, maybe $20 instead. We don't get eye or dental care. That's particularly problematic for me because I didn't mention it, I have an eye condition that requires serious surgery. It costs like $4,000 outside of insurance, so I can't afford that. So the biggest thing is we don't have eye or dental care. Otherwise, we do have coverage.
Okay. And so at Harvard, you guys have a student union but not being paid attention to?
We're in bargaining right now,
Okay.
but there are a lot of things that Harvard has said are just straight off the table.
And like, so do the students go in and negotiate their own package with the administration, or is it like consistent, or what like is Harvard, everybody that's working in your situation, is it the same thing, or are you negotiating basically on your own?
Yeah, our unit is students who are doing research or teaching services for the university. So it's a lot of graduate students and some professional students and some undergraduates. But we're all in one union, all working towards one contract.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Edwards?
Thank you very much. Some of my questions are driven in a way to pay a little bit of devil's advocate to counter, I think, some of the questions people have been asking me. And it's intended to elicit, I guess, some better arguments, or to highlight some of the things that I think are necessary. So I wanted to, and I'm using the letters from the university as part of that conversation. So with Boston, I think it was BC, we got a letter from BC. And so I wanted to make sure I went through some of what they're saying that they're providing, and if they are or not providing them, but to be fair to them. So here it states, graduate students at Boston College are respected members of the community. They receive tax-free tuition. Is that correct?
Yes.
Competitive stipends.
So the stipends that graduate workers receive at Boston College is variable depending on the department. In chemistry, we just got a raise to $32K. And my colleagues in other departments make $20,000 a year, which Boston College claims to be a living wage in the city of Boston, and it is not.
Okay. Healthcare benefits that are 100% financed by the university?
I had to pay a lot of money for dental care because the stress of graduate school is making my gums recede and I need surgery.
They also have access to parental leave.
2 months paid parental leave, and that policy was not equal across all the schools that graduate workers work in. So that was for the arts and sciences, but it did not apply to the Lynch School of Education until we started clamoring for it, and then Boston College decided to give it to us as a way of making us be quiet.
And affordable dental plans.
Again, we do not have an affordable dental plan.
No dental plan.
We pay for it, and it is not affordable on my stipend. It was a lot of money out of my budget, but I had to pay it.
In total, first-year doctoral students receive salary and benefits worth at least $40,000.
We don't get paid $40,000.
Salaries, again, this is what is submitted as testimony from the universities.
Yep.
In addition, contrary to assertions that have been made by activists seeking to unionize within the United Auto Workers, Boston College is not opposed to unions. The fact is, Boston College's police and trade staff are unionized, and BC has enjoyed excellent relations with their respective unions for decades. Boston College also uses organized labor for all of its campus construction projects of more than $1 million.
If Boston College is not opposed to unions, why don't they bargain with ours?
Another false assertion is that the BCGU UAW is a certified union for graduate students, which Boston College is refusing to recognize. The fact is, on February 6, 2018, BCGU UAW voluntarily withdrew its petition before the National Relations Board.
We pulled our petition because the anti-labor NLRB was likely to overturn the decision that would have enabled graduate workers at private universities across the country to form workers' unions, and we didn't want to jeopardize the already bargained contracts of workers at other universities.
So is it, from my education and for those organizing, there's nothing stopping Boston College from recognizing your union. They can negotiate with your union regardless of what the NLRB says.
Yeah, a union is composed of workers who have agreed to form a collective to bargain with their employer. We have agreed to do so, and our employer is refusing to bargain with us.
So lastly, advocates have falsely claimed that union supporters were disciplined for distributing leaflets on BC campus last fall. The fact is, several grad students were found responsible for interfering with a public event and infringing on the rights of others to hear a presentation in our main theater on September 27th. They are bound by the same policies and code of conduct that apply to all 14,400 BC students.
I was one of the 18 graduate workers who were disciplined for handing out flyers at an event. That is a fact.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Can I, what was the discipline? You said that high levels of discipline. Can you explain
Yeah,
to us
so,
what the discipline was?
I received an academic warning, which is essentially the highest level of warning they give you before they put you on probation, which I don't see that they have any right to do. I have good grades.
It doesn't have anything to do with academics.
No, and I was taking part in a protected concerted activity as a worker. I am a student and I'm also a worker. And as a worker, I have a right to hand out flyers in my workplace, which is where I was, handing out flyers as a worker.
Right.
And again, I just want to be clear, this is, I mean, it's not funny, and it's important that people understand that when the university is saying that you withdrew your application from the NLRB, that you weren't walking away from certification as a union, and that's what I believe that you're trying to state in this letter.
We are still a union, and the unions existed before the NLRB existed. So we are still a union. We still have the right to bargain with our employer, and they need to come to the table and bargain with us.
Unionization, in our view, would fundamentally alter the faculty-led approach to graduate education that has been a defining feature of our pedagogy throughout our 156 years of service to the city of Boston, the nation, and the world. In general, how do you see unionization impacting the academic rigor at BC or the actual teaching and quality of education provided at BC?
It wouldn't affect it at all. There have been multiple studies, which we would be happy to provide you with, that have demonstrated that there is no detrimental effect of unionization of graduate workers on the quality of their education or on their relationships with their advisors.
On to Northeastern. There we go. I'll do the same thing. Reading again from the letter from Northeastern, our PhD students on an assistantship enjoy the benefits of a tuition waiver. Is that true? Competitive financial support.
I mean, I'm not sure how it compares to other colleges, but
Okay.
I know that, sorry, just one more thing, that the amount of financial support differs a lot, as other people have said, across academic departments. So, for example, the highest paid departments, usually in the STEM fields, get like mid 30Ks, but in, for example, the humanities, that number is much lower.
Yeah. Health insurance.
Yeah, and as others have said, we don't have vision or dental.
You don't have vision or dental?
No, we have access to one, I believe it's one dental checkup per year free. The others you have to pay.
And a multitude of university resources ranging from travel and conference funding to professional development services and guidance.
What does that mean?
Do you get, I don't know, travel benefits and conference funding?
They recently upped the amount of money we could get reimbursed for conference travel. It used to be like in the, I think it was like 200 or 300 you could get reimbursed for, but if you're traveling internationally for a conference, your expenses are much more than that. And then there is travel reimbursements that do vary by department. In computer science, my department, you can get, if you apply for it, a travel grant for $1,000-ish. Yeah.
And that assumes that you have the resources in your pocket to pay out.
Yes, you do have to front all the
And then to be
costs.
reimbursed.
Yeah.
So if you don't have it, even to go credit card debt or whatever. To further support our graduate students, the university formed the PhD Network
Yes.
as a central resource to assist PhD students with the myriad of support services offered by the university.
So functionally, the PhD network isn't anything. They have like one-off events. I think they started a support group. It became sort of like a response to our organizing activity, like as we had started demanding more and more services, they began to like offer them. So as a result, it's a direct result of our union organizing. So for example, our union made a big campaign issue out of the fact that we have no recourse when we deal with abuse and harassment on the job. And Northeastern at that time did not offer an ombudsperson for graduate workers. There was an ombudsperson if you were technically considered a university employee, as if you were staff, for example. My understanding that other universities in the Boston area do have an ombudsperson. Northeastern did not until we demanded that they increase services, and they did offer that as a result of our demand. But it's still not enough. As you know, an ombudsperson can't advocate for you, and it is not a role that provides anything other than confidential advice or support. If you're experiencing an issue, you have no real recourse for it.
So, for example, if you feel that you're being sexually harassed, if you have concerns about discrimination, where do students go right now?
So you can file a Title IX complaint. So Title IX is the federally mandated office that the university uses to process such complaints. So Title IX is entirely, the outcome of any Title IX investigation is subject to the university's decision. So as a result, if you have an issue and you bring it to Title IX and you go through that process, the university can simply ignore it. And that's been the case in other universities. So there was a case that I'm aware of. I believe it was University of Connecticut. I can't remember exactly, but essentially there was a graduate worker who had experienced harassment, and the Title IX procedure did nothing. And then they were able to bargain for a grievance procedure through a union contract, and that was actually able to offer an independent arbitration. And that's essentially what we want, because currently there is no independent process.
Is there any process, for example, with the state, the MCAD, the Mass Commission Against Discrimination, where workers such as yourselves, who are also students, could file a complaint or could feel that they could go there?
Yeah, I think we could file MCAD, but I don't think any of us have ever tried. Yeah.
I'm just curious.
Yeah.
So, but right now, what's the name of your local, your union?
Oh, so we're the graduate employees of Northeastern University.
And the university is not negotiating with you?
Yeah, no. So we had a couple meetings with the provost and their legal counsel, and they said to us that they didn't believe that unionization was in our best interest.
Convenient. Thank you.
And they wouldn't explain why. Of course.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Sam, yours says they receive tax-free tuition, meaning they take the taxes off the so just the taxes off your tuition. You're still paying tuition, but they
I've never paid tuition. If that's something that they take out of my department's funding, I don't have anything to do with it.
Tax-free to, like, I don't understand that.
I don't
So
either.
It's not counted as income by giving it to them for free.
Oh, okay.
There, a couple of years ago, there was an attempt in Congress to make our tuition count towards our taxable income. And
Okay.
I called my representatives and told them that I would have to drop out of grad school because I don't have enough money to pay that.
Okay. And we'll come back to you. Councilor Garrison, questions?
I yield to Councilor Edwards.
Okay. Councilor Flynn? Yeah, we'll come back.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Baker, and thank you to the panelists for being here. Just reading some of the documents, UMass, Boston, and Tufts have formed unions. Do you know what the difference is between some of the graduate workers at those unions and your situation as it relates to benefits? Are they more, do they have more benefits than you because they're more structured, or they're more organized, or?
I know that the University of Connecticut has a child care fund that workers can draw from. They won that in their contract.
And are you what union are you affiliated with? Like, is there an umbrella group above?
UAW.
Oh, UAW, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I know there's, just reading some documents, there's 10,000 student workers in the city. It's a big part of the Boston economy, obviously, is higher education. A lot of companies and a lot of colleges and universities are making a lot of money off of education. Just listening to your stories, it seems to me that the only way you really could be a graduate student teacher is come from a wealthy family, unfortunately. And if you came from a wealthy family, you wouldn't have these issues, but it penalizes working class kids that want to be a professor someday, because living that type of life you guys just explained is not something, I wouldn't want to do all that stress, but I'm sure it does take a toll on you, certainly financially, but medically as well. And what impact does that have down the road on your future as a professor when you're still dealing with some of the issues you had as a student teacher? It must put you back in a negative position with all the hardships that you've had as a student teacher. I was just wondering if anyone wants to comment on that.
Sure. One of the, I think, themes, and Councilor Edwards, you're kind of hinting at this in what you were saying, is they often present the compensation as a gift. It's often put in these terms like, oh, wow, we write off $50,000 of tuition. Next year, they could raise it to $70,000 and be like, whoa, your pay just went up $20,000 a year. And I think something that the universities often do in order to bolster their position is sort of undervalue just how difficult the work is to do. In order to teach, this last semester I was teaching an undergraduate macroeconomics course. And not only did the course actually go quite a bit beyond what I myself had learned in undergrad, but it was just a mathematically very challenging course. It took a lot of prep time. I had to be able to learn the content of the course sufficiently well to teach it to undergraduates, many who at the university are expecting to be donors and to keep the university going in the future. That is not work that anyone can do. It's challenging work. It's extremely valuable work. And so to be able to be like, oh, we're handing you this large gift of $30,000, many people could be pursuing other careers, making quite a bit more money, adding to their retirements. One thing that we've talked about in our campaign is retirement plans. It's something that I don't think any graduate student has. People finish their PhDs when they're 30, sometimes later. People put off having a kid until they're done, and that's, for a lot of people, your late 20s is exactly the time that you'd like to be able to have kids. People sacrifice a lot because they care about their work, they care about the academics, they care about the institution, and then universities act like it's a gift just to compensate us for what we're adding to the institution. So I think there's a bigger picture that being able to sort of undervalue what our role is for what is actually quite difficult labor to perform is one of the things that I think is most important to fight as we work to form unions and represent ourselves.
I just really appreciate your point, Councilor Flynn. I think that this is, above all, almost an issue of equity. I think it's egregious that the career path of academia is essentially foreclosed to anyone who doesn't come from an independently wealthy family. And to put this in perspective, in-state tuition at UMass Amherst is $29,000, right? That includes room and board. By the time my daughter, Sierra Lena, begins kindergarten, I will have paid out of pocket the equivalent of a 4-year college degree for her.
Mm-hmm. In daycare?
In daycare costs alone. That doesn't include health insurance, housing, food, diapers, daycare alone.
And maybe my final question, just following up on some of your comments, just on the medical and physical and mental health that the toll takes on you. Does it also impact the studying that you're doing or the research that you're doing? It certainly takes time away from what you're dedicating your life to in terms of teaching or research, but when you have those types of medical issues that you're dealing with, that people are dealing with generally, it's also a time commitment away from what you really are studying for. So it does probably impact your professional life as well.
Absolutely. Can I give an example? During the course of my pregnancy, I probably spent 4 to 5 hours, of course unpaid, during the week fighting with insurers to cover my pregnancy. This year I had to pay out of pocket $50 for a flu shot because it wasn't covered. I've seen one doctor in the 12 months since I had my daughter because it's not clear to me whether or not visits to an OBGYN will be covered.
Thank you, everybody. That's all the questions I have. I could actually ask more questions, but I don't want to.
You can go if you want.
Okay. I'll ask one more question.
Right?
You know, this month, June, I served in the military 30 years. June is, in the military, almost everybody is required to engage in mental health assistance, but the mental health wear and tear on a veteran has a huge impact on you. But I just wish, I hope everyone in the room really is organized as a group, so you are able to get, medical care, but especially mental health care under the conditions that you all have outlined here tonight. I think it's a serious issue, and it's not one to take lightly. And if there's a way the city council can be helpful on that issue, but the mental health of the students that are teaching these courses really should be a top priority for our city and for our state. Our city and state relies heavily on the money from higher education, and the least we all can do is make sure that the student teachers, such as yourself, have the best mental health care that we could provide you.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn.
Thank you.
Councilor Sabi George.
Thank you, Councilor Baker, and thank you to Councilor Edwards for leading this effort in sponsoring this hearing. And thank you for sharing, I think, your very personal stories. And I think some of them, I think especially Zach highlighting, using just his last initial, some of the fear and pressure you may feel to share that story today. And thank you also for sharing some of your, both your experiences and that of some of your colleagues, especially around the mental health piece. My work on the council has involved creating greater access to mental health services across our city, so that's really important to hear. Have any of you, or maybe through the chair to the maker, has there been any analysis around profit or revenue that's generated through student work for the universities that are highlighted here today, but just in general?
I mean, one of the
Bill, come on.
One of the things that they tell us when they're recruiting us to Boston College for the chemistry department is how much money we have. We are the second highest endowed department in the university. The first highest endowed department in the university is the football team. So we bring in a lot of money for the university in the form of grants. And if the university has that much money, why can't they afford to give us dental insurance? Why can't they afford to give us yearly eye exams? We are all nerds and we all wear glasses. So, like, I use humor as a coping mechanism. So, no, so the university has the resources to pay us more money.
No, and I appreciate that, and I think that none of us question that, but I'm wondering if anyone's done an analysis.
I don't have the
revenue
numbers
generated through your work, and I think that as nerds, that there's an ability to do that research, and I think that that analysis would be really important to bolster this effort and support this effort, because we've done it, we've seen it through athletic programming across the United States with universities and the bucks that those teams, and they can do that. They can understand the revenue through the sale of jerseys, for example. So what is it about your work? And I think we know and understand it, but we have to get to a point where we see it on an Excel spreadsheet. What is the revenue generated by the work that all of you do through your research for the institutions that you work at?
I think I don't have those numbers right now, but they would be fairly easy to quantify, at least for the lab sciences, because the people who do all of the bench work that is getting funded by these grants are the graduate workers. So if you look at the grant money, that is how much money the graduate workers are bringing into the university. And the professors, like the PIs, don't receive the entire amount that they get in the grant. The university takes some, and that amount varies depending on the university and the department.
So I think what would be helpful to us is we've got the stories, and I think the stories certainly lead the conversations, and they're, as I forget who, I think it was Zach that noted some of the research that's been done to measure the impact of this work, especially on mental health. But I think if we can also do that, qualify with research to demonstrate the impact that all of student workers have in this industry, the research industry, which it no doubt is, and it's a money-making industry. If we can understand that information, that's, I think, very helpful to the cause. And a cause I support. I don't want it to sound like I don't support it, but I think that really helps in this effort.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, in addition to bringing in money through the universities, many of us are also residents of these cities and these communities for going on a decade, right? And so we bring in income to the city merely through raising our children here, through living here, for partaking in all that the city of Boston and the neighboring communities have to offer.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councilor Edwards?
Thank you. And I'm happy, so what we do, we'll have a committee report that comes out to the general council. And so by then I hope to have some numbers for my colleagues at the city council. I think along with looking at revenue generated, patents also generated by the universities, those are extremely valuable. And also looking at where we do partner with universities of graduate students and nursing, for example, we'll be working at Boston public schools and making sure, I never thought to look, but now I'm going to make sure that that person is paid certainly a living wage to be a nurse in Boston Public Schools. And I don't want them to be considered a student and learning how to be a nurse and therefore being cut out of any benefits. So that's something I promise to do that research for my colleagues and yourselves. Boston University. So again, we got a response from the university, and I just want to make sure we go through and highlight some of the things that all your benefits that you've been receiving. But as stated, we believe that our PhD students are first and foremost students whose teaching and research activities are integrally related to their scholarly and professional development. We seek to build a student-centered PhD program for the 21st century. In 2013, Boston University introduced a full funding model for PhD students on the Charles River campus, guaranteeing that all PhD students in good standing receive 5 years of stipend support and health insurance.
Well, I don't know why they didn't. There's a medical campus too that has a lot of graduate workers, so they should not be ignored. Full funding relative to what they want to give, we're asking for more, so I don't consider it full funded.
So similar funding support is provided to PhD students in the School of Medicine. Is that?
Okay.
Is that another campus? Or?
I'm not sure, because the medical campus includes more than the School of Medicine, so, but if they're saying it, that's fine.
This fall, we will institute a new policy, this may be news to you, entitling all stipended PhD students to a set amount of guaranteed paid vacation time per year.
So we've actually talked a lot about this to our fellow grad workers within the union. And one of the biggest problems is a policy in quotes. There's no enforcement mechanism for it. There's no monetary value associated with it. It's basically just the university saying that we think you should have 2 weeks off. So for a lot of graduate workers, the ones that need a policy of enforcement mechanisms the most don't really have anything. That's who needs that a policy. And so if you just say, yes, you have 2 weeks off, what if my advisor says, I don't want you to have those 2 weeks off? I'm stuck. That's the whole point of having the contract. And even this little minimal statement that they're giving us is only because our union has been advocating for mandatory vacation time. So there is a policy in quotes, but it's really meaningless. And we have talked to plenty of graduate students about this as well.
So I think what I'm hearing from folks, or from the panel, is that even whatever benefits that are provided are at the university's election, if they choose to take them away, decrease them, you have no counter to that in any way, shape, or form. And I think Harvard had mentioned that Harvard is currently engaged in active good faith negotiations with HGSU UAW. Negotiations began on October 15, 2018, following a vote in April 2018 by graduate students to organize. Since October, we have held more than 40 meetings over 36 weeks, including regular bargaining sessions with the HGSU UAW. Is that true?
So we did start in October, but 40 meetings for a first contract. I think anyone who's been in contract negotiations, for a large unit with workers who do different kinds of work, 40 meetings is nowhere close enough. We have, over the summer, maybe they mentioned this, that I think we will have maybe 2 or 3 meetings total. Working out the details of this requires persistent back and forth. And we have students have signed a petition, a majority petition to speed up bargaining. We had a sit-in, and the pace of bargaining has been excruciatingly slow still.
So Harvard notes that they intend to continue negotiating with the union. So at this, at this point, is it your understanding that Harvard University recognizes your union?
Yes.
And is negotiating in good faith with your union?
They are negotiating, but there are some things that are on the table that they have simply refused, that are just very standard things for either in other contracts with other unions at Harvard, or just standard in a contract. So I mean, the biggest one is protections for discrimination and harassment. If you can bring a sexual harassment or a discrimination case to a third-party arbitrator, as I think someone mentioned. Right now, in the end, Harvard decides. If you have a discrimination complaint, someone who's paid by the university decides. What we're asking for is for the university and the union to jointly fund an arbitrator so that if you have a case like this, you can go to someone who ultimately isn't paid only by Harvard. This is something that exists in other union contracts on Harvard campus, and they've refused to include that in our contract so far. And there are other standard things about information, being able to actually successfully represent our members and know who they are, and also in compensation, from the perspective of the university, some of our compensation is financial aid when we teach, and some of it is salary. From a student worker's position, the financial aid is conditional on teaching. And so if they have discretion over part of our compensation, the rest of the compensation doesn't mean much. So on basic things about representation, about is what we're negotiating for in compensation, does it even matter? Can we go to a third-party arbitrator for cases of discrimination harassment? These are all, and health insurance, Harvard just has so far said no. So we are negotiating, but as far as basic duties for us to be able to perform as a union, our administration has been largely stonewalling.
So I wanted to thank all the panelists for describing not only the workplaces that you are working in, your workplace injuries, your workplace risks, and I truly appreciate you breaking down how that is actually breaking you down as well as individuals. I think it's important that you express not only what your universities are doing, but the ultimate impact in terms of workplace as a worker class, the injury and how that's impacting us. So I want to say your advocacy, like any other union's advocacy, is for not just yourselves, but for all workers that are going to come after you and students, including your children one day who will possibly go to a graduate student. So I want to thank you for your bravery, for your voice, and I look forward to continue to partner with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Just one more question. So is everybody's package, you get tuition, is it full tuition you get? Or is it vary by?
I mean, we pay fees.
Fees. And then, so when you're done with your schooling, someone said they were just teaching, and what do they basically just own you after you're done with, like, so how long is that contract when you're not getting paid for school? You're still working, and like, how long are those contracts typically?
I would say it's not a contract. That's the most important thing.
Yeah.
But
Agreement or whatever?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to reinforce that point. The only contracts we sign are like intellectual property rights agreements. BU, we just signed one. So I can speak from my experience, like for instance, just to give you an idea of how that works practically, when I was taking classes for like a year or so total, you sign up for classes, there's a certain cost that the university determines. They say there's that cost, there's fees associated with it that we pay or something, and then the university says they'll cover it. After we are finished, I don't have after I've finished completed the amount of coursework that I need to, which is very minimal, then we're just paid by, for teaching or through our grants. So the university's continual focus on it feels very much like they're just make up tuition, because it's not like they're the ones that are setting the tuition. They're saying this is how much you'll pay, and then they're paying it themselves.
You have to work this amount of time
to
pay it back.
The tuition doesn't really matter for graduate workers, especially after you've completed your teaching assignment or your student assignments. For most graduate workers, we're working, we're researching, we're teaching, we're not taking classes. And so that emphasis on us being students is just not our experience, which is our point.
You're more workers than students at this point.
Yeah.
Okay.
We do at BC, we receive a letter from our department every semester telling us how we're going to be paid. if that comes from teaching or if that comes out of our advisor's grant. And then at the bottom of the letter, it says for work that is not to exceed 20 hours per week. And in my experience, we work many more hours than 20 hours per week. The expectation in my lab is that we work 60 hours a week minimum, and our advisor regularly reminds us of that fact via email, and I do not remember the last day that I did not come to work.
Thank you. Any other questions? Council Flynn?
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Baker. I just had one final question. Did anybody ever try to figure out what if you added up all your hours in a week, what the hourly rate would be?
For me, it was $16 an hour. Some semesters, it goes down. Yeah, it goes down as low as $5.
$10.
With research and teaching, it can be, the hourly rate. I was going to say it can be, easily 60 hours a week of just work, including academic work. But we had hourly RAs in the law school who got a raise because Massachusetts raised the minimum wage. So.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you, Councilor
Council
Baker.
Flynn. And at this point, we'll call the next panel up, but when the next panel is coming up, I'd like to, Doris
Landaverde,
Londair, yeah,
Landaverde, and
George Bogue, James Mazur Seas. Okay, doesn't look like anybody's there. And the next panel is,
if you're here, those are folks who signed up for public testimony, so they can come up and speak at the two mics on the sides while the next panel is coming up. Sorry,
that's okay.
if they're here.
Okay, the next panel will be Darlene Lombos, Brian Doherty, Ed Childs, Aura Designee, Sarah Suzuki, April Harris, Sherry Bucknor, Jordan McMillan, and Beverly Brakeman, and we can fill in both sides over here. So there's nobody for public testimony. Oh, you can get started.
Did we call your name? Okay. Let's see.
Name and affiliation.
My name is Doris Landaverde. I am from CIU 32BA, and I'm here to support our brothers and sisters at Harvard University. And also, I want to share how important is have agreement that can can work as a workers, like protect us. I want to give just one short story about how one supervisor harassing my coworkers, and when the union take the agreements, he got fired. This is the good, and also I want to share, we have a child care. We receive child care. And I think why the students can have the opportunity, like can receive child care, like help to take care their kids. And also, I want to mention one thing, how important is have a clear language in our contract, because sometimes we don't know about laws, and we need in this have a clear language in how we can do agreements. This is what I'm sharing. I'm so happy here to support our brothers and sisters and the students at Harvard.
Thank you, Doris.
Hi, my name is James Mazarius. I'm a master's student at Boston College. And even though I'm a master's student, I organize with the union. And just one thing I wanted to talk about today, why unions are so important to myself and to a lot of other graduate workers, is how important unions are for LGBTQ plus workers. Short of comprehensive like statutory protections for state and federal laws, unions provide the only protection that a lot of LGBTQ employees have across this country. Currently, there's no federal law prohibiting discrimination against transgender employees. The Trump administration right now is working to roll back protections for transgender employees and for employees based on sexual orientation. There's 3 cases before the Supreme Court right now, which will determine whether Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act does in fact cover sexual orientation or gender identity. In more than half the states in this country, you can still be fired based on sexual orientation or gender identity, unless you have the protection of a union contract. And for many LGBTQ employees, the only employment protection you have is your union card. Unions historically have been incredibly important for LGBTQ workers, and this is particularly important when your employer claims a religious exemption or religious status, like Boston College does. In its filings in the NLRB, besides arguing against the union, BC claimed that the NLRB had no jurisdiction over the school because of its religious status. You might have seen this on the news just in the last week. The Archdiocese in Indianapolis told 2 Catholic schools that they had to fire 2 teachers because they were gay. One of the schools agreed and fired the teacher. The other school refused, and the Archdiocese revoked its Catholic accreditation. In 2004, at BC, the English department tried to fill a chair, and their top 2 candidates were both gay men. The school, including input from the current president, Father Leahy, wanted to bypass those candidates and hire another candidate. The English department was upset, thought this had to do with their sexual orientation, but said, okay, we'll go with your candidate, but if he rejects the offer, we'd like our top 2 candidates, these 2 gay men, to be put on a list as the backup candidates, and the school refused, and that made it clear that there was something, that their sexual orientation may have had something to do with the decision. Why is a union important for LGBTQ workers at Boston College? It's 2019, and the school still continues to discriminate against LGBTQ community members. Gender identity is not part of BC's non-discrimination policy. And BC still, to this day, refuses to recognize any queer student organization. In 2002, the Princeton Review ranked BC as the 2nd least welcoming college in the country for LGBTQ students, putting it at number 344 out of 345 universities surveyed. In response to this and a lot of other bad press they were getting, BC recognized a gay-straight alliance, but not, and continues to this day to refuse to recognize any queer student group. And it changed its sexual orientation to include, its non-discrimination policy to include sexual orientation, but not gender identity. But when they added sexual orientation, they put a caveat in, which basically said, it is the policy of Boston College, while reserving its lawful rights where appropriate to take actions designed to promote the Jesuit Catholic principles that sustain the mission, to comply with state and federal laws prohibiting discrimination. So they put in a caveat. It was so important to them to reserve the right to discriminate against LGBTQ members of the community that they had to put that clause to give them the right to do it. They were still going to assert their religious exemption. I've sat in meetings with administrators and deans, and they've said, well, we personally agree with you and we sympathize with you, but the school's position has to be respected, and you have to understand it's not going to change. And I sit there and I think, I look at them and I think, you need to calm down. It's really not that important for you to discriminate against LGBTQ community members. You could grant everyone the same rights and the world, it's not going to end. On top of that, BC refuses to have an LGBTQ plus student center. Georgetown, a Catholic university, which also has a graduate student union, has an LGBTQ student center. But BC's application of this idea of Catholic Jesuit values is selective. Just this past week, they had an event with the CEOs of 2 weapons manufacturers. They refused to divest from banks who invest in private prisons, who discriminate against minority homeowners, and who put power plants on indigenous reservations or in poor and non-white neighborhoods. In 2003, the same president of BC who opposed gay marriage, who refused to recognize an LGBTQ student center, declined to sign a petition opposing the Iraq War. So it seems that it's only LGBTQ issues where this idea of Jesuit Catholic values is applied and not in other areas. So I'll try to be brief and wrap up. You can see with a lot of this happening why LGBTQ grad students or grad workers at BC would not feel comfortable reporting harassment or reporting discrimination, or would not feel that they'd be treated fairly in a grievance process or a discipline process when you don't have any set out protections that could be agreed upon in a union contract, where it's basically arbitrary and it's up to a department chair or a dean or the administrator who you happen to be dealing with and whether or not they're sympathetic to your cause. So basically, unions are crucial for protections for LGBTQ employees and students, because unions are based on the principle that no one's rights are secure unless everyone's rights are secure. And in closing, I just want to thank the council and Councilor Edwards for your support of grad workers, because if you really support LGBTQ plus issues, then you support labor issues and unions. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Darlene, we're gonna start with you, please.
Great, thanks. Thank you, Councilor Baker, for holding, oh, nope.
Say that again. No. Is George here? Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, George.
That's fine.
Sorry,
That's
Darlene.
I know everyone wants to go home. I'll be really brief. I'm the president of the Clerical Workers Union at BU. So, I mean, I see what grad workers do. Personally, my son is a graduate student in a university in another city, so I realize what they do. But I just want to say that BU and these other schools, they make money off the work these people do. So if that's not something that should qualify for unions, I don't know what is. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Darlene, state your name and affiliation, please.
Yep.
Thank you.
I will. Can I do that later after I thank you?
Sure.
Thank you, Councilor Baker, for holding this hearing, and Councilor Edwards for sponsoring it, and to the entire Boston City Council. Time and again, this body, along with the Walsh administration, has stood up for this city's multiracial, working class, multi-gender communities and our rights to collectively bargain. And there should be no exception in this case. And I just want to thank Ellen Wallace and my sisters and brothers of UAW and all the students here today who's spending their evening telling us what it's like to be student workers. You are the ones that are inspiring me to continue the work that I do. My name is Darlene Lombos, and I'm the Executive Director of Community Labor United and Vice President of the Greater Boston Labor Council. And together, we represent over 100,000 union members and community leaders throughout the Greater Boston area. Today, our Labor Council and community partners stand with the more than 10,000 student workers in our city who are doing the amazing work for universities in Boston, teaching classes, performing groundbreaking research, and helping find cures for diseases. They are doing the work that our city, our families, and the public rely on. And that's what universities are supposed to be about, right? Educating and innovating for the public good, not protecting their bottom lines or their tens of millions of dollars in their endowments. Universities are not businesses, and they don't pay taxes. But unfortunately, too many of them have lost their moral compass and exploit student workers in the same way some of the worst corporate giants have done. Student workers are just like any other worker, and they deserve the same rights and respect as everyone else. They deserve a living wage, good health care, and protections from harassment and discrimination, just like everyone else. And just as organized workers have always done, whether it was the famous striking UAW workers in Flint, Michigan in the 1930s, or the Wayfair workers walking out in Copley Square just yesterday, CLU and the Labor Council are deeply committed to continue the legacy of challenging corporate giants or any other institution that acts like one so that we can protect and expand the public good. On behalf of Community Labor United and the Greater Boston Labor Council, AFL-CIO, and all of our community and labor unions, I respectfully call on the City Council to stand with the student workers across Boston. I encourage the Council to consider all possible means of ensuring these universities serve our city's multiracial, multigender, working-class communities by fully respecting and bargaining with their student employees. Thank you.
Thank you, Darlene. Brian?
Thank you. Good evening, members of the Boston City Council. Thank you for this opportunity to speak tonight. My name is Brian Doherty, and I have the opportunity to represent the building and construction trade unions in Greater Boston and the Boston Building Trade Unions, which represent 35,000 working families in the Boston area. I'd just like to start by saying thank you to all of the community and labor voices and all of the workers at these universities who are fighting so hard and advocating for the union protections they deserve. The universities and colleges we were discussing, Harvard University, Boston College, Boston University, and Northeastern University, have a great track record of using union labor to build and maintain their campuses. We appreciate that, and we appreciate the great partnership the building trade unions have with these colleges and universities. Their commitment to building with union labor is good for workers, for worker families. It's good for the colleges and universities. It's essential for our local economy, and it's vital to strengthening our communities. Choosing to utilize the region's best trained, most professional, and most inclusive workforce showcases that these colleges and universities recognize the value of a well-trained, skilled, and inclusive workforce. Beyond the building trades, they also have a very highly trained, highly skilled workforce in the form of their world-class graduate student employees. The number of employees total upwards of 10,000, and it's exciting to see them uniting and making their voices heard. We commend and applaud these colleges and universities for building union. We also believe that these employees who work in the buildings after we build them should also have the right to form a union and to collectively bargain. We believe that whether you're pouring concrete, pouring coffee, or pouring chemicals into beakers, every worker deserves the right to form a union, have a voice at work, and have the ability to support themselves and their loved ones after work, outside the workplace. We have seen Boston's colleges and universities serve the city's community well in the past. We are choosing to remain optimistic that they will change course quickly on this issue and bargain in good faith with their student workers to ensure safe and fair working conditions, just like we have on the construction sites at these critical institutions. That means negotiating fair contracts for graduate student workers with the recognition, wages, health care, and protections from harassment and discrimination that workers deserve and need in the workplace. I'd also like to the dedicated student workers of these Boston universities, please know that the Boston Building Trade Unions stand with you today, tomorrow, and every step of the way, and to continue with you in this fight. We work on the same campuses. We share the same values. We share the values that workers' rights are human rights, and the right to collective bargaining is an essential part of our democracy. On behalf of the building trade unions, we say thank you for this opportunity to speak this evening. We say thank you to the graduate employees for your advocacy and your courage in this space to fight for what's right and what's fair. And thank you to our partner community and labor organizations for your continued advocacy. We believe that this is an opportunity for all of us to come together, for the workers of the world to unite, and we thank you for the opportunity to share this tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Ed Childs.
From Harvard University. I'm actually speaking for Keisha Daly, who wasn't able to make it today.
Are you the local 26
yes,
representative?
I'm local 26.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So my name is Ed Childs. I'm a retiree from the Unite Here. Actually, I retired last week.
Congratulations.
At Harvard University Dining Hall Services. I served 40 years as a chief steward and negotiated 11 contracts there. Our union supports the right of the student workers at Harvard to organize their union. And we believe that they have this right for collective bargaining and have a right to a fair contract. The administration has refused to agree to basic rights, such as arbitration for harassment and discrimination that gives a student worker the right to have their case decided by a neutral party who is not paid by Harvard. This is outrageous. We all know from the news that the administration cannot police itself. We know that from inside Harvard, where the president actually put out a survey of students and found that 20 to 30% of the students were harassed by the time they graduated at Harvard. That's a terrible, terrible statistic. that we would not tolerate in the kitchens of Harvard. And we see where this comes from, because they're not allowing these two articles that we have, that the Dining Hall workers have. Just want to read them, the small ones. We have actually 2 pages of this stuff, but here's just 2 articles that they will not allow. The university and the union agree to cooperate to prevent sexual harassment, whether from supervisors, employees, students, or visitors. The other article that they will not tolerate for the students to have is the employer and the union agree that all employees and managers shall treat each other, regardless of position or profession, with dignity, respect, courtesy, and trust. How dare students ask for this? So I'd like to tell you what we've been doing with these articles and why these are necessary to be in a contract. Both of these articles enforce through arbitration in our contract. What's the difference between having language in a contract and not having language? It's the difference in what we call solidarity versus solitary. Solidarity means a cooperative effort of all our members in all aspects in fighting for this language, coming up with this language, and voting for this language. It means a lot to those who are most affected. It lets them know that they are together with people who have their backs. It gives them power and encouragement to enforce this language. Solitary means that you are on your own. You may have a little help here and there, but you don't have that encouragement in knowing that people have fought for you and have your back. A good example for that with us is a worker who was harassing women. And harassed a woman who finally complained to us. And through the grievance procedure,
In your unit.
in our unit, the students are not protected, and some of the other unions, other workers are not protected. The dining hall workers have fought for this, and we are protected. We are protected more than anybody else in Harvard. That's why we went on strike. And for our dishwashers, our cooks do not tolerate sexual harassment on the job. So there was someone who was sexually harassing a woman, and we immediately took it up through our grievance procedure, and this worker was fired. But in our investigation, we found out that he had harassed other women, and we asked, why didn't you come forward? It's because they felt that it was slight and that they didn't want him to be fired. They knew they had the control over his being able to work, and they tried to discipline him. That's power. That's power in their hands. But when they seen that he harassed someone who was vulnerable, and he was immediately fired by the actions of these women and the union through our grievance procedure, which includes arbitration. When you don't have this language, you have a tendency not to complain because it's not dealt with. And if it's not dealt with, you feel the repercussions. That's a well-known story in this country, well-known story at Harvard University. People don't complain about sexual harassment or discrimination because they get repercussions if they do not have a contract with this language in it. Another example of how this stops a hostile work environment from happening is we had a manager a while back who was passing out checks. As he was passing out checks, he went to the Black, Latin, and Asian youth and said, verbatim, "Oh, here you go. You can buy a lot of crack with this." When we found out, we followed this up with a grievance and campaign. But while we were campaigning, there was a snowstorm. And workers usually stay at Harvard in a major, major snowstorm because we got to feed the students in the morning. Well, he only wanted some of his favorite men to stay. So and some of the women who came forward and says, we'll stay because we want to help feed the students. You also get overtime for this. And he says, okay, well, you're going to have to sleep in the basement. There's some dirty mattresses down there that you can sleep in, and watch out for the rats. Well, they said, well, we're not staying, and they went home. Well, the men that he wanted, he put them up in a hotel. And the women complained when they came back. Well, this was also while we were in this arbitration movement about what he had done to the other youth. And so, adding this to it, he was fired. He also did a lot of other things. He was a terrible, terrible person. And during the process, that it was amazing to our workers in the grievance procedure. Harvard's defense of this guy, because they defended him, that's why we were on our way to arbitration, was that upper management told the lower management to be tough on the workers, be tougher. And they told him specifically, be tougher on these workers. His toughness was sexually harass people, racially harass people. That's toughness. A lot of management, that's toughness in this country. And we were appalled when that happened. That upper manager was also a terrible person who later was also fired in our process because in a management meeting, he said the N-word 3 times, not once, not twice, but 3 times in a management meeting. And the managers tried not to tell us, and they told us, don't let any union workers, but obviously the black workers who were there, the black management who were there, they told the union. Within 2 weeks he was gone. And it's because we have this in our contract. It's not because there's a law out there. And even if there is laws that somewhat protect us, we need language to protect us in arbitration in our contract, because language by itself, which if you don't have arbitration, is not enforceable. That is how we make a good environment. Our workers can go home feeling safe at work, go home, come back the next day because they know they're going to feel safe at work. With these articles in our contract, we are the ones that enforce the laws that are good for our workplace. We not only enforce the laws that you've made, we've also enforced the rules that we make. And your rules, you make laws, and there's laws in the books that are not enforceable in workplaces. I'll go over an example in a little while. But we're the ones who do it, and we do it through this.
Bring it home, Ed.
And so, and this is not only good for our workplace, it's good for the city. Because unless these laws are enforced, you have a terrible situation. Sexual harassment and discrimination are not acceptable. Harvard's refusal to give that same rights to the student workers to arbitrate these cases is simply not acceptable. We negotiated with Harvard many times. Most recently, it took a strike, a 3-week strike, which you all supported, thank you very much, to get a fair contract. And on that, we actually added more stuff. We added transgender rights, Native American rights. And along with and I want to tell you the consciousness of our workers, is that we got our wages and we got our health care, which are our main issues. But we got them, and the workers decided to stay on strike until those clauses about transgender and Native American rights be put in the contract. We stayed out on strike for another day. And so that's the consciousness. Now, I would like to say what happens when you don't have a contract like this. Because there's one of the universities that's represented here. I won't say what it is, but we had a contract with them 5 years ago. We just negotiated with them. I was one of the organizers at the time to do that. And we had, at the first negotiation, actually meeting of our workers that we had gotten to help organize, 35 of them We sat them around in a room, and we said to them, what is the one thing you want from the union? And they made half the money that we make. So everybody thought 35 people would say money, 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 money. Not one of them said money. They all said respect. And the Harvard workers that were there says, what's going on? They make half as much. And we found out these things. Sexual harassment was going rampant in there. Not harassment, I'm sorry. There was no sexual harassment. There was assaults. There was a guy who says, you know what I have to do every day in work? Is that I have to watch in the kitchen where a manager sexually assaults my mother, and I can't do nothing about it. And he said, this has been happening for years. And the first thing when we got our first contract there was 6 managers were fired immediately. That's what happens, and that's what's going on in kitchens. That's what's going on in management that don't have a union to protect them, because we enforce the laws. We make the things right. We make hostile environments disappear. We're the only ones that can do it. Nobody else is going to do it. And that's our testimony, and that's why the Harvard grad students and all the grad students for the university must have a contract, especially protection. Harvard University says they can't have sexual harassment protection. This clause, this is insane.
Thank you, Ed.
You're welcome.
Now we'll start here on the left and work our way that way. That will come on when you start.
Members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity. Please bear with me. I have a little bit of laryngitis. My name is Jordan McMillan. I am a PhD candidate in sociology and the current president of the Graduate Employee Union, UAW Local 6950 at the University of Connecticut, which represents more than 2,000 graduate assistants, or GAs, as I will refer to them henceforth. As someone who worked at UConn both before we had a union contract and after, I am here today to speak about how collective bargaining can and has worked to achieve fair processes and outcomes for survivors of discrimination and harassment. Given that there are 10,000 graduate workers at private universities here in Boston, I hope my testimony helps the council understand the critical nature of this issue to this important workforce in your city. Our union has made a huge difference in the lives of GAs at UConn, both in terms of concrete economic gains, including an excellent health care plan, and critical workplace rights and protections. We are particularly proud of, and I want to focus on tonight, on our negotiation of stronger protections against and recourse for sexual harassment and other forms of discrimination. As Harvard is apparently doing currently, UConn attempted in the bargaining process to place limits on graduate assistants' options for recourse in cases of sexual harassment and discrimination. But in bargaining our first contract in 2015 and in our second contract in 2018, the university ultimately agreed that given the extremely lopsided power relationship that can exist between GAs and a supervisor, it is in the mutual interest of the institution and GAs to have fair recourse. In fact, at the conclusion of our 2018 negotiations, the university's lead negotiator told the Board of Trustees that our team viewed stronger non-discrimination and harassment protections as mutually beneficial, unquote. Though we have had to work through a number of differences at the bargaining table, we are deeply appreciative that the university has ultimately agreed that union representation and access, if necessary to a neutral arbitrator to render a decision on discrimination or harassment grievances, is a fair and mutually beneficial provision. I will share one recent example that illustrates how critical these protections and advocacy and representation by the union are for GAs and ultimately for gender equity in our universities and the broader academic workforce. Anyone who knows anything about the academic workforce is familiar with the following scenario that highlights the extreme power imbalance that our contract addresses. An international GA in the sciences is paid to do research as a GA under the supervision of the male professor who will eventually sign off on her PhD dissertation. In this particular case, after enduring months of sexual harassment culminating in an effort by the professor to forcibly kiss her, this GA independently filed a complaint with the university's Title IX office. The university concluded that her case lacked sufficient evidence for the university to sustain the complaint. Then the retaliation started. No one will ever know exactly what the professor said to other faculty, but not surprisingly, more than half a dozen faculty rejected her request to be her supervisor, with comments such as, faculty members would prefer to have a new, freshly admitted student than take on a student who has had problems with a former advisor, and, quote, if I was you, I would have looked to transfer to a new school a long time ago, unquote. On the verge of leaving graduate school, she luckily remembered that the union steward who had come a few months earlier to introduce her to the union. Working closely with the union, she filed a grievance under the contract against the long pattern of harassment as well as retaliation. With the possibility of the facts being submitted to a neutral, non-university arbitrator, and with the help from the union navigating the process, this GA worked out a very favorable settlement that enabled her to remain in the graduate program, work with a new supervisor, and complete her PhD. Roughly 3 years later, she graduated and moved on to a great job. Without the union and the fair process negotiated into the union contract, this GA was ready to leave her PhD program and be another statistic in an ongoing lack of gender equity in our universities. Tens of thousands of our UAW graduate worker colleagues across the U.S. have similar provisions in their contracts, including those at UMass Amherst, NYU, the University of Washington, the University of California, and California State University, of course, UConn. If it truly believes in gender equity, Harvard, like UConn, should recognize the mutual interest in having stronger protections against sexual harassment. No graduate worker should feel like leaving graduate school is their best option. I would like to close by encouraging the council to do everything in its power to communicate in the strongest terms to Harvard that they should agree to a fair recourse in the contract with HGSU UAW in the current negotiations, and quickly.
Thank you, Jordan.
Thank you. My name is Beverly Brakeman. I am the director of UAW Region 9A. We represent more than 36,000 members in New England, New York City, and Puerto Rico. I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. Thank you, Councilor Baker, and thank you, Councilor Edwards. We really appreciate the opportunity to be here and for you to allow all of us to bring this important issue forward. As the regional director, I sit on the UAW's International Executive Board, representing a total of more than 400,000 members in a wide variety of workplaces across the United States, Canada, and Puerto Rico. In higher education, the UAW represents more than 75,000 academic workers across the United States, including more graduate student workers than any other union. We also represent postdoctoral researchers, adjunct faculty, support staff, and other university employees. The UAW has a long and successful track record representing workers in this sector. Graduate workers at UMass Amherst, for example, negotiated and ratified their first contract in the early 1990s and continue to have a strong unit that has made numerous improvements in their contracts over the years. In fact, graduate workers in particular have generated unprecedented energy and momentum in the very recent past. In just the last 5 years, more than 17,000 academic workers have organized and democratically chosen representation by the UAW in the Northeast, including graduate workers here tonight at Boston College, Harvard, Boston University, Northeastern University, and thousands more still in the process. As you have heard tonight, and we'll hear from some more folks, graduate workers at 4 major universities in Boston, making up a total of 10,000 workers, are in active campaigns at various stages of the process and are dealing with various degrees of opposition from university administrators. These workers are a critical workforce in the city. Their teaching and research both enhance the city as a hub of quality education that attracts the best students from across the globe, and also helps bring more than $2 billion per year in research grants and contracts that stimulate the local economy. And I do have a daughter who's going to be coming here to college in the fall, so I'm very proud that she'll be coming to this city. As you have also heard, these workers share many of the same concerns as all other workers, such as fair pay and benefits. But they have also identified a number of issues that they've spoken about here tonight, specifically in their profession, strengthening protections and recourse in cases of discrimination and harassment. Also unique to this sector is that the imbalance of power experienced by all workers with their employer and its managers is dramatically increased in the academic sector because supervisors of teaching and research assistants have ultimate control over both the workers' academic pursuit and their financial security. Given UAW's long track record of reaching agreements with universities across the U.S. going back decades, it is so very disappointing that these administrators invest so much time, energy, and resources fighting workers' efforts to have a voice in the workplace and fair contracts. These administrators and trustees should embrace their young workers who are natural allies in strengthening our universities as beacons of progressive ideas against the forces of reaction that seek to close our borders and move our society backwards. Instead, they are using this Trump moment to stall workers' efforts to make universities and our society better. Clearly siding with Trump and the 1% in their effort to stop these workers is out of step with the values of this city. You have mostly a young workforce who overwhelmingly have positive experiences being part of unions, who then carry that positive experience into a variety of workplaces across our country. We understand why Trump and the rest of the 1% find that threatening. We encourage the leaders of some of our greatest universities to approach this with a more open mind. I will close by saying that the UAW will continue to stand behind these workers as long as it takes to win their fight for fairness in their workplaces. Thank you.
Thank you, Beverly.
Is it on? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon to the esteemed City Council, and thank you to Councilor Edwards for providing this space and to have this conversation, and all of you for bear witnessing to our experiences. My name is Abril Harris, and I'm a third-year PhD candidate at Boston College in the School of Social Work. And today, you have all heard the testimonies of my fellow grad workers and have learned about the impact that the lack of protections of workers' rights has on our livelihood and frankly, our well-being. Perhaps many of you in this room, some of you in this room have attended grad school or are currently in grad school, so may be able to have these experiences resonate with some of your experiences. I have been a grad student for 4 years, unfortunately, and I've become accustomed to a lifestyle in which many of my resources are constantly siphoned and left near desolation. Being a grad student, you are socialized to believe and accept that this process of obtaining a higher education will be hard and that you are not expected to garner much support from your institution. I say that we have an opportunity to change that, and we do not have to continue to punish students for trying to improve their prospects, not only for themselves, but for their families. As a Black and Latino woman raised in a working class family, the socialization messages that I received about grad school and higher education were non-existent because my family had not yet pursued this level of degree before. As with many other grad students of color, we often come into these institutions with little information to prepare us for what is to come. We are often recruited and brought into programs and departments with promises of support and told that the environments in which we will exist will be inclusive. I learned very quickly that this is not the case. In addition to all the hardships of being a grad student, which we have all heard today, these hardships are often amplified and compounded for students of color. We come onto campuses that are generally homogenous and not truly inclusive. This has led me to experience isolation and fear. My department, I must say, is fairly supportive compared to some of the other experiences of my colleagues. However, the campus climate is at times unbearable. Upon stepping upon the BC campus, there is an immediate feeling of otherness. You are given looks of confusion or surprise at your presence. I myself was studying in our department space meant for doctoral students and was asked to present my ID to make sure that I was a student there. And I couldn't study in that space for several months because of my general feeling of being upset. This was reported to our department administrators, and we were told to not jump to conclusions about possible racial implications of this event. I could, as a student of color, for methods of protection, I often travel with a backpack or a Boston College sweater just to avoid any issues that I might encounter on campus. Many of my colleagues have been reprimanded for being in areas in which we are told we are welcome, and then later we find out we are not. Several professors and students have made offensive and demeaning comments in the classroom, and as students of color, we are left to endure this treatment without any recompense. When we use our voice to discuss our plight to the leadership of this institution, it is often met with hostility and silence. As students of color, we are burdened with being the voice of our cultural group and charged to help the school with helping to them to create a more diverse space and inclusive environment on campus. This is not our job. Those things should have already been in place before we arrive. However, we are asked and pressured to sit on committees, review curriculums, and dedicate our time to these endeavors without pay, as these are deemed volunteer opportunities. And what truly makes it hurtful is when we dedicate time and try to make the campus more accepting and inclusive, our suggestions and offerings are rejected or ignored. As being a student who is Black and Latino, especially when you are called to teach into classrooms where the majority students are white and upper middle class, this can be stressful and traumatizing. About 4% of students are Black and only 6% are Latino, and those are my ethnic identities. And I draw these out because BC often boasts about their student population being diverse. They claim that 50% of their population is AHANA, and AHANA initially was created by students of color on BC campus in solidarity to represent multiple cultures, and is now used to lump together students of color and compare it to their white population. Grad students of color are often challenged to prove that we are qualified to teach, and as a TA or an instructor, if a student says something in class that is offensive or becomes disrespectful, our departments are often ill-equipped to support us and encourage us to ignore and endure these experiences. There are no affinity spaces for grad students of color to find support and community. Two of my colleagues started a group for PhD students of color, and they received little funding to encourage the longevity of this group. We are tired of enduring for the duration. All we ask is to have our right to engage in collective bargaining with our institution to ensure that we are properly supported as workers and that the contributions that we make are valued and recognized. I come from a long line of union workers. My family comes from longshoremen and merchant marines, and I have seen the ways in which unions have guaranteed them their wages and protections against discrimination. Grad student work for too long has gone unrecognized, and our contributions are seen as repayments for the favor of being allowed to be educated at these institutions. While I am grateful to have an education and spend my time in the learning environment, it is also the university's privilege to have students offer their intelligence, perspectives, and energy to support the knowledge that manifests to inform the solutions that will hopefully make this world a better place. I hope we can count on the council's support to implementing a union for grad workers. We are a vulnerable population and are often exploited. Universities have traditionally been white elite spaces, and discussing workers' rights without attention to intersectional identities like race and ethnicity will continue to perpetuate the inequities that exist in the broader society. Unions are one of the few tools that communities and individuals have to insulate themselves from injustices and exploitation that happens in the workplace. Please support us students in doing this in a time where workers' rights are under attack. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, April.
My name is Sarah Suzuki, and I am a PhD candidate in the Lynch School of Education and Human Development at Boston College. And I am an activist for the Boston College Graduate Employees Union, and I am also an international student. In preparing this testimony, I spoke with my fellow international graduate workers on campus to gather their stories. They wish to remain anonymous because speaking up is a tremendous risk for us. Many spoke of incredible hardship, stress, and fear. Our ability to stay in this country is dependent on being in good standing with the university. This means that most international graduate workers are forced to stay silent about issues they face in the workplace. We can't report being overworked, harassed, or discriminated against because of the precarity of our situations. Just last fall, Boston College disciplined several international graduate workers for exercising their federally protected right to organize at their place of work. Some international students were given administrative warnings. One was given academic probation, which is just a step below suspension. These tactics present an extreme threat that serves to silence us. It is clear to me that the manner in which Boston College treats its international graduate workers reveals deep misconceptions about who we are. There is a misconception that most international graduate workers are wealthy and that we do not need financial support. International graduate workers come from all socioeconomic backgrounds. I talk to many who face grave financial struggles. Some come to the U.S. with family members who are dependent on them. Assumptions of affluence mean that those who are not well off are left to suffer. Boston College refuses to respect our majority vote and bargain with its graduate student workers. One of the consequences of this is that many of us are paid a wage that is below what is considered a living wage in Boston. Even though we support the core functions of Boston College as a university through our research and teaching, many of us are paid around $21,000 to $24,000 before taxes. A livable annual income in Boston is estimated to be at least $30,000 before taxes for an adult living alone. Citizens and green card holders of the United States have the option to supplement these meager wages by working a second job, sometimes a third. However, international students who are on visas are only allowed to work a maximum of 20 hours a week during the school year and can generally only work on campus without a special permit. Some of us are fortunate to be able to make additional money within these strict parameters. We find a second on-campus job for just the summer months where we're allowed to work more hours. However, many find themselves in much less than ideal conditions. We may be forced to borrow money or take jobs where we get paid in cash to avoid a paper trail. This is not the position that we want to put ourselves in, but many of us find ourselves with no other option. International graduate workers must also pay exorbitant visa transaction fees and may have dependents who cannot legally work in the country. These conditions magnify the burden of a low stipend, and the financial stress impacts our mental health. Some of you may wonder, you knew the deal going in, you knew what the stipend would be. Why didn't you go somewhere else? I believe that every worker, regardless of where we come from, deserves to have our basic rights upheld and deserves to make a livable wage. We conduct world-class research and generate economic revenue for the universities that we work for. We have come from around the world to institutions like Boston College to study and work to make our dreams a reality. We work hard to achieve our goals, and most of us seek to uplift our families and communities in the process. We add diverse perspectives to the academic environment and bring knowledge from other cultures. We do not deserve to be exploited, silenced, and demeaned. We demand to have our union recognized. We demand fairness and justice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Shri Bucknor, and I'm a rising third-year PhD student worker in Harvard Sociology Department and a member of the Harvard Graduate Students Union Bargaining Committee. I just want to clarify one thing really quickly about the tuition remission question that you had before, Mr. Baker. We have the pleasure of representing over 4,000 student workers on our campus. Many of them do get tuition remission, but we also represent professional school workers, student workers, and undergraduates are also in our unit, and they do not get tuition remission. A lot of them end up leaving the university saddled with over $100,000, $200,000 in debt. I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to you all today. I'm here to share our union's experience bargaining for the right of a survivor of workplace harassment or discrimination to a fair and timely process with interim relief and the choice to bring their case before a neutral decision maker not employed by Harvard. Harvard has been steadfast in refusing this request. One of the many things that the Me Too movement has shown us is the importance of power differentials in our society. It's something that we have heard repeatedly today in this room. According to recent studies done by reputable academic policy advocates, the academic workplace is not immune. For example, a recent report by the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine suggested that academia is, quote, second only to the military, unquote, in the pervasiveness of sexual harassment. A 2014 survey by the American Association of Universities found that nearly half of women say they experienced some form of sexual harassment during graduate school, but only 1 in 10 reports it. The dramatic gap between the numbers who experience and those who report and address sexual harassment underscores the lack of confidence survivors have in existing university systems of recourse that are tilted against the survivor. Lack of confidence breeds inaction, which perpetuates the underlying problem and maintains a gender inequity in the academic workforce. Based on our experience, Harvard is no exception. In listening to student workers across campus, many don't trust institutions like Harvard to police themselves, that without access to a neutral person to rule on a dispute, it is hard to imagine a fair outcome. Others fear retaliation for coming forward with their story. We have explained these facts to Harvard in support of our proposal for access to union representation and a neutral arbitrator, and Harvard has rejected our proposal. They have repeatedly told us we should accept the status quo because they say the status quo works fine. And yet, we have shown numerous times, both in and outside of the negotiating room, how Harvard's internal process has failed student workers and the wider Harvard community. One wouldn't need to look much further than the high-profile case of Jorge Dominguez. Dominguez is a former professor in Harvard's government department who sexually harassed students for decades, was found to be guilty of serious misconduct in the 80s, and nevertheless was promoted up the ranks until he reached the position of vice provost for international affairs from 2006 to 2015. Our recent internal report, a hard-fought win by student activists, found that Dominguez was guilty of unwelcome sexual contact over a span of 40 years. As a result, he was stripped of his emeritus status and barred from campus. Activists also called for an external review, which the report also called for, which to this day has not commenced. While I am encouraged that Harvard finally did the right thing, this should not have taken decades. He should not have been allowed to remain on campus and continue harassing students, and survivors should not have felt like they had no choice but to leave, and while doing so, jeopardize their careers. Contrast the decades of harassment by Professor Dominguez with a UCLA postdoc who, with vigorous advocacy from her union and access to a process ending in neutral arbitration, if needed, was able to resolve a pregnancy discrimination grievance literally in a matter of days. This is just one, albeit high-profile instance of the failure of Harvard's current process, but throughout our organizing, we have also heard from current student workers who are survivors of harassment and discrimination, and who have experienced firsthand how Harvard's current process does not work. For example, one Black student worker had a faculty member tell them not to try to work with a particular professor who was from a country that is predominantly white, because that professor prefers to work with people from their own country, i.e. white people. This was incredibly off-putting for that student worker. They sought help from high-level university administrators, but those administrators advised the student to try to resolve the issue informally with people in the department rather than pushing for a grievance procedure through the union. However, this approach places the burden of addressing these issues squarely on the shoulders of the student worker who is dealing with the consequences of the problem. There is no university-wide process to address racial discrimination at Harvard. I'll say that again. There is no university process to address racial discrimination at Harvard. A third-party grievance procedure for discrimination and harassment would provide a framework for actually holding the university accountable to the standards we at Harvard espouse. Another example is that of a student worker who was a target of sexual and gender-based harassment while working in a lab. A coworker in the lab harassed this worker by commenting on her body and giving her graphic descriptions of his body. He also said she was useless. This went on for years and caused the student worker to lose confidence and caused her extreme stress. This student worker attempted to get help from her supervisor, other faculty, the dean, and eventually the Title IX office. In other words, they went through Harvard's internal process that they claim is working fine.
After multiple conversations with her supervisor and a revolving door of Title IX coordinators who gave her conflicting advice, and continuing to suffer uncomfortable encounters with the harasser that could have been avoided, they finally arrived at a solution to protect the survivor. This took almost a year that disrupted her work and damaged her relationship with her supervisor. The process of working with the university to stop harasser caused more pain than the harassment itself. She seriously considered leaving academic science because of this experience. Harvard administration claims to support survivors, but that support must be in action, not just in words. They agreed to negotiate a contract, but they have been dragging their feet for over a year, and they are refusing to provide fair and timely protections against discrimination and harassment. We believe that in 2019, all workers deserve a process they can trust when they experience harassment and discrimination at work, a process that includes a neutral decision maker not on their employer's payroll. When I leave Harvard in a few years, I want to be proud, not just of my academic accomplishments, but I also want to be proud of my university. As a result of my experiences organizing my fellow student workers and negotiating in the room with Harvard administration, I cannot say right now that I am proud of my university. I hope that this changes in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Cherry. We'll go to some questions now. There may be some. Do you have questions, Councilor
No, I
Edwards?
just wanted to follow up on some points. But
Yep,
for
sure,
the
you
most
go
part,
ahead.
I mean, I thought, again, all the testimony was excellent. I just wanted to follow up on some of the points that you mentioned about some of the money that is generated. You had heard one of my colleagues asked about some of the research, and I think you had mentioned millions or some. Could you talk to me about how much?
$2 billion dollars in Massachusetts is the number that I talked about. That the students, well, across the globe, bring more than $2 billion per year in research grants. So the work that they do in the labs is funded by grants that come into the states and then fund the universities. And as I think Sam said before, the universities get some of that money, you know, and that brings in work and jobs and, you know, esteem, frankly, to the universities. And it's on the backs of workers who are not getting paid very much money.
Do you think it would be possible to get a breakdown of some of the locals that you're organizing, of some of the research of the grant money proportionally that they brought to the universities?
Yeah, we can. We did it. We may even have it, so we can certainly provide that to you. I know we did it when we did UConn, and that was a very compelling argument when we had to take their contract before the legislature, so we'd be happy to get that for you.
And then also for the representative from UConn, I'm curious because you heard several of the graduate students testify to the actual mental and emotional toil of working in an unsafe work environment, which is what they're doing. And you talked about working without a contract and before a contract. Is there any way to get research or surveys showing the impact on the workers with or without a contract, number one? And then I don't know if it's been done or if it's worth looking at the attractiveness of a university to recruit and retain student workers and graduates by having a union there, not just a PhD kind of network, but an actual union.
Absolutely. So I'm certain there is a way to get that research done. I do not know that it has been, but I think that it would be very useful and make a very compelling argument because, as I mentioned, I was there before we had a union and after, and I can attest to having a safe work environment significantly improving my emotional and mental well-being. Also, having stable finances helps that as well.
Can I just anecdotally, because I helped to lobby, in Connecticut, the state university contracts have to go through the legislature, so I helped to lobby that. And we did a petition at that time, and I remember there were so many legislators who had been graduate or research assistants, and they were like, sign me up, you know, because they knew what the experience as a graduate student worker was and how good it would be for them to have a union. So that's more anecdotally, but it was very surprising because legislators I would not have expected to sign a pro-union thing were like, hell yeah, So, so I just wanted to add that.
But I think also it would be important to add to the narrative or research and to find out the attractiveness of a school if it's going to run on its elitism and how it's one of the best schools for, and then pick whatever to also be one of the best schools to be a graduate student at. Like the experience is one of the best, not the academics that you're going to be able to demonstrate or be exposed to. So, yes.
I can't speak to that, not from a research standpoint, but from an experience standpoint, being a graduate assistant. There are multiple people in my department who specifically said when they started that they came to UConn because it was unionized. And a number of our members who got their master's degrees at UConn and moved on to other institutions for their PhDs looked specifically for universities that have been unionized for their graduate assistants because they knew that it offered all of the protections that Harvard students need right now, including sexual harassment, discrimination, and financial stability.
And I think one of the biggest points that I'm pulling from the recent testimony is I had thought about it in terms of wages, in terms of benefits, in terms of just general dignity. But if you do not have a graduate student union, you essentially do not have discrimination protection as a class on your universities, is what I'm hearing from many of the testimonies here, whether it's because of your orientation, your gender identity, or your racial identity. It seems that that's basically no protection otherwise. Is that your experience and that's your understanding?
That is correct. When I had my incident, my first initial was to reach out to support from my department, and we received emails letting us know that the situation in which we interpreted was not how it happened, and that we were possibly, making it more than what it was. And we were told to kind of remain quiet and wait until they were able to address the situation. And they did set up a mediation between me and one of our service workers in the department. Even though I specifically said that having a police presence, waking up to a police presence was traumatic, they decided to set a meeting with me and the service worker that was also present, even though that wasn't my initial complaint. So having protections in regards to discrimination would be very helpful, and having an actual process to go about making these claims would also make me feel more confident as a student worker.
I just want to add a little bit of the experience of student workers at Harvard. So because there is no established university process for dealing with issues of discrimination, I also want to add bullying to that. We are also trying to negotiate protections against bullying in our contract, which so far the university has not agreed to. So we have people who have experienced discrimination or feel like they have experienced discrimination. They go to the Title IX office because that is the only real kind of training we get when we get on campus. It's all about Title IX. It's all about Title IX. Title IX, as we know, I hope, deals with gender and sexual-based harassment and assault, and not for other forms of discrimination, which we're trying to get all forms of discrimination covered in our contracts. The students go to the Title IX office, they go to Title IX coordinators, and these coordinators kind of are just like, we don't know how to deal with this. This is not our wheelhouse. And those students are kind of left with no recourse, which is why we're fighting so hard for what we're fighting for.
Thank you.
Beverly, you said the contracts need to go through the that's just the state, that's UConn, yeah. That's not the private colleges.
No, in the private university, it's under federal law, it's not state law.
Yeah. Jordan, your contract, what we're talking about here tonight, you have arbitration, obviously, in your contract. Do you have dental? Do you have vision?
We have dental, and one eye exam a year is covered under our medical plan.
So just the exam?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, and any other health issue that would be deemed medical under an eye exam. So I personally had some eye problems that were covered by my medical insurance.
Okay. Any more questions? Councilor Flynn, any questions?
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Baker. And I had two questions. The first one to Beverly. Beverly, is there any difference between negotiating a contract for the student workers if they're employed at a state school or a private college throughout the country, or is there any benefit students have because they're in a state school and not a private university?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I'm not the most experienced negotiator in the room, but, there's different, the issues that the graduate student workers experience at both a private university and a state university are the same. I will say one difference, however, when they're at a state university, you have a lot more leverage if you're in a state like Connecticut or Massachusetts, where you can go to legislators and congressional delegation and those kind of folks who can put pressure on the university. For example, at the University of Connecticut, I mean, they're the flagship university, so we were able to get our U.S. senators, our entire congressional delegation. So they also, the state universities tend to be more highly unionized, in general. So I don't know if that answers your question, but the issues for the workers are the same.
No, that's very helpful. Thank you. And maybe the last question I have is to Darlene or Brian. I know the work you do on helping many unions across the state, whether it was the hotel and restaurant workers or the Mass Nurses Union Association. I know the answer to it, but I just wanted to hear your answer. I know your unions are always there, but why is it important for unions to get involved in supporting other unions that need help? Can you talk about some of the solidarity there is between unions and making sure people are treated fairly across the country?
Thanks, Councilor. I would just echo what Ed said over there, that the difference between solitary and solidarity. I think when people come together, I think that's one of the things that the right and corporations try to do, is to isolate us, to say that our problem is our own problem. No one else is feeling the same way. And what unions do and what community organizations do is get people together and say, actually, the problem is systemic. The problem is intentional. The problem is historical. And that's something that we always, as unions, but also as community organizations, have to remember, is that organizing collectively is a direct challenge to the right, to the corporations, to capitalism, to patriarchy, and to white supremacy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn. I would echo Valerie Lamos's points. I would also say that we have found it's a pretty special place in Boston, where we've seen a cross-section of incredible solidarity, where we believe every worker has the right and should have the right to dignity in the workplace and fairness and the right to form a union. And if I could, something I wrote down just because I thought it was so eloquent. My sister to the left said unions are one of the few tools that all people and all workers have to insulate themselves from discrimination and injustice. And I think that couldn't be better said, and thank you for that advocacy. But that's what we're fighting for in Boston. That's why we're here, to lend our voices to this important fight. And thank you to your advocacy too. I think the City Council, the Walsh administration, has had a very important role in sticking up and fighting for folks who need help, and who need a voice. And I'd just like to thank you for your advocacy.
Thank you, Brian.
One more very important difference that I sort of said in my testimony, but I think bears repeating, is that graduate student workers in the private sector are in danger of having their rights to organize and unionize be taken away from them by Trump and this NLRB. And that is a huge difference, and I think makes it all that more, adds to the urgency of getting these contracts and calling these universities, these private universities, on the carpet for siding with this, I don't even want to call him my president, but Trump and his NLRB, because they're going to do bad stuff.
Well, thank you. And my final comment, well, two comments, is I want to end by saying this hearing was very educational. I want to say thank you to Councilor Edwards and Councilor Baker. There's a lot as a city councilor that I learned tonight that I didn't know, especially the mental health issues that some graduate student workers face. I didn't know that. I didn't know about the harassment issues that they face as well, and the little protection that they have in addressing those concerns. So I want to say thank you to Lydia and Frank for bringing us together, and also the international graduate workers are also impacted negatively, especially with very limited rights because of, it might be immigration issues, it might be visa issues, and if you were to complain and lose your job, unfortunately, it might have an impact on your visa or immigration status as a worker or as a student. So I want to say thank you for sharing that story, and as someone that represents a large immigrant community in Boston, I appreciate all the hard work that you're doing here in our city for our students. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Council Flynn. So we have two more people. You guys are excused. Thank you very much for your testimony. And can I have Chris Wynack and Finn Prideaux?
Why not? I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Massachusetts in Boston, and I'm here in solidarity with our colleagues at the private universities who are speaking to you today. There's been a couple of points that came up tonight that I just want to address. I didn't bring prepared notes, but I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about our contract or the union we have at UMass Boston. In terms of the competitiveness of graduate employee salaries and the wages we make, this notion of competitiveness is very difficult to address in the university. It's akin to fast food restaurants talking about competitive wages. When you calculate the wages, the real wages that we make at UMass Boston, we're paid just over $18,092 a year for our full-time contract at UMass Boston. And when you look at the work we do as research assistants, teaching assistants, and our work as students, that's less than minimum wage. And the university claims that that's a competitive wage. I was our lead negotiator last time, and they claim that that's a competitive wage. They don't even want to make cost of living increases to that. On the notion of the value of grad employees, most of us here who are grad students have gone to Google Scholar before and know the research engine well. There is no peer-reviewed research anywhere on the value of the grad student community to universities. And one would think that's something that would be well studied. I'd be happy to study my own population rather than going out to the field. When we did our contract negotiations with UMass Boston last time, we learned that the university does not track the value of grad student work. Over $60 million in grants last year, and they don't know how many grad students are involved, our involvement in it, or anything related to that. I know personally I've written and been part of over $400,000 of research funding, of which I've personally been paid less than $25,000 as a highly qualified personnel on those research teams. In terms of the supplement, the role that unions have in supplementing the mental and physical health of our students, we maintain a box of tissues in our office, just like you do, Councillor, because we have a lot of students coming in and crying all the time. I've had students that, we've had to put on suicide watch and go to the counseling office on campus. We've had some very serious problems. All students have, I think, some kind of a crisis at some point in time where they wonder if they've made the right decision taking this vow of poverty that we take to go to grad school to do something good, to help create knowledge, to give back to our communities. And we in the union don't think that they should also have that crisis when it comes to being treated as a worker in their place of work. The issues with harassment are real and serious. For international students, one thing I will note is if you do have a crisis at work, you immediately lose your visa and you have 60 days to leave the country. Often the only group that's left to fight to get you back to grad school is the union. We're the ones that can fight the grievance, deal with the disciplinary hearings, represent the students who often can't afford to hire a labor lawyer. We're there for them, and we can get those students back working on their degrees. And finally, with the union, the one thing that we do have, as someone alluded to earlier, I think it was Ed, we have respect on campus. When we go in with students, those students are not alone. We know the administrators to go to talk to. We can help those students advance the mission that they have in getting a degree and moving through higher education, eventually trying to become a part of the system. Many of us want to become professors and join the community. And without a good experience in grad school, it's difficult to want to join that profession going forward. Anyway, I just wanted to make a few of those comments, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about what our situation is at UMass Boston. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Finn?
Hello, I'm Finn Prideaux. I'm a PhD student at Northeastern University. And I just wanted to, I felt I had to respond to what was in the letters from the universities that Councilor Edwards read from before. And this was a point that Councilor Edwards made herself. So we heard from several students, several fellow grad workers about the challenges faced as grad workers. And I just wanted to really hammer home that the point of organizing is not merely to have the universities address these challenges, but to get that language fixed in a union contract. So as Zack from BU mentioned before, when the councillor read about the BU's guaranteed 5 years of funding or the guaranteed 2 weeks of vacation, these guarantees are meaningless because it is entirely at the university's election. So on all of these issues that have been spoken on, you know, a university could hire 100 mental health workers tomorrow, and it wouldn't be good enough because they could take it back the next day. They could offer free dental and vision coverage for all of their students tomorrow, and it wouldn't be good enough because they could take it back the next day. They could offer free childcare tomorrow. It wouldn't be good enough. They could take it back the very next day. And locking these things down in a union contract is really the core of why this organizing is so important. It's not just getting a response, getting the universities to change. The guaranteed language in a contract that allows us to enforce these terms and hold the universities to account is what is really important here. Anything else is transitory, can be undone. And particularly for international students, as was just mentioned by Chris, are in a state of even greater precarity because any issues that arise at work, you know, if they lose their status, if I lose my status as a student, I have this limited time in which I'm forced to leave the country, break my lease, spend my savings flying halfway around the world, unless I can find some way to deal with this problem. And so it's the enormous precarity that comes with the lack of a contract that is so important, and doubly so for international students. Thank you.
Thank you, Finn. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak publicly tonight? No? Then we'll go to closing statements. Councilor Garrison, you have a closing statement?
I just hope this hearing will come to address a lot of these labor problems, and good luck to everyone.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Flynn, closing statement? Okay, thank you, Councilor Edwards. Sorry.
Thank you all. I know it's been a long evening, and many of us are probably looking at the debate starting shortly. Speaking of which, Bev had mentioned that there in in Connecticut, there had been political pressure put on a lot of those who were elected at the state and federal delegation levels. And I just wanted to note, earlier today, we had a tweet from a presidential candidate in solidarity for BC. Bernie Sanders actually noted that he had heard about this in the organizing efforts. So talk about opportunities for political pressure. I think that this is a conversation that we should bleed into every single form of organizing, especially now that a lot of the national attention is looking at workers' rights and who could potentially be running the country. I want to also just note that this has been, I think, the beginning of many other campaigns and conversations. I really appreciate the linking together. I think it was the Northeastern student who talked about working with Right to the City, working with other housing justice organizations around the university as a union, and that's another example of what unions do. They also link into other social justice movements, as the UAW was there with Martin Luther King and fighting for racial justice. So this is something very normal. So having more graduate student unions means that our communities will have more justice warriors standing with them for things out in and outside of the university. But I also think it's really important is that while we, in many cases, may not have the same influence in private universities that we do in public universities, as UMass has a union, and other UMass Amherst has a union, I think it's really important that we look at the power of divestment and the power of looking at our private foundations that are funding a lot of this research, and the power of looking at our federal delegations that are pushing for federal dollars for these universities, and any state money going to private universities for research. I think that it's time to talk to those individuals, especially the private foundations, and say, I don't know how you can fund research done under slave conditions, under sexual harassment, and under oppressive, exploitive conditions. How you can fund that research makes no sense to me. I think it's time to talk and bring those foundations to the table who are funding research at these universities that will not recognize graduate student unions, and I think it's an opportunity to continue that conversation. I think it's also an opportunity to bring in a lot of our brothers and sisters who fight against racial discrimination, gender discrimination, and sexual orientation discrimination. As we heard from many of the students, there is no protection unless the union is there. So I look to the NAACP, HRC. I'm looking at other organizations now to come and support graduate student union organizing and making sure that they have a voice, because those students will not have a voice otherwise to fight against discrimination. I want to thank all the labor folks who came out here in solidarity. It was beautiful. It was absolutely beautiful to have folks who work in the kitchen, who work in the hallways, who work in the university stand with the student workers who are also working in the university. I'm very proud of this hearing. I think it's one of the best things I've done in my short political career here, and I am so incredibly proud to be still a member of the UAW, proudly standing with my brothers and sisters today for social justice. Thank you so much for coming tonight.
Thanks. Thank you, Councilor Edwards. I just think it's unfortunate that we look at these universities as liberal thought leaders and bastions of new ideas, but yet they want to talk one way and walk a different way. So with that, thank everybody for coming out tonight. Thank for the people that came out and were on panels. Thank you for your advocacy, and this hearing is adjourned.